Chapter 878. No woman would be able to resist the beauty of a jewel, regardless of whether they had the ability to buy it or could only look at it and sigh. Even women who didn't like money wouldn't be stingy with their admiring gazes. Zhong Luoyue used to be a jewelry auctioneer when she was studying. The main reason was to meet and get to know the nobles of the upper class. The other reason was because she loved the beautiful jewels. Therefore, when Lady Eve took off her Light of the Forest, and said that she could lend it to Zhong Luoyue to try on, this noble lady didn't refuse. First of all, she really liked the jewels. Second of all, she wouldn't let Lady Eve and herself get into an argument. She was also a businesswoman. This Lady Eve's origin was a bit mysterious, but she always exuded the aura of a true noble. Who knew if they wouldn't meet again in the future? The so-called social network was something that one had unknowingly accumulated. In this society that relied on relationships, connections were the greatest wealth. The more powerful a person was, the more they understood this principle. In an elegant room filled with incense, Lady Eve was putting the Light of the Forest on Zhong Luoyue in front of a full-body mirror. Under the light, the resplendent jewel emitted a luster that only a truly precious jewel could have. As a former jewelry auctioneer, Zhong Luoyue could roughly estimate the value of this Light of the Forest. In the mirror, Lady Eve was standing behind Zhong Luoyue. After putting the Light of the Forest on her, Lady Eve leaned forward and pressed her hands on Zhong Luoyue's arms. She said softly, "Look at you, you really suit it. You flatter me." Zhong Luoyue smiled. Lady Eve reached out to touch Zhong Luoyue's cheek. This action made Zhong Luoyue feel a bit uncomfortable, but she didn't move too much. Young, confident, beautiful. Lady Eve closed her eyes and sniffed the area behind Zhong Luoyue's ear like a lover. "Miss Zhong, I rarely get to experience your fragrance." From time to time, the tip of her nose would even touch the back of Zhong Luoyue's neck, giving Zhong Luoyue the feeling that this Lady Eve would kiss him at any moment. Lady Eve? Zhong Luoyue furrowed her brows. In the end, her physical discomfort trumped her mental calmness. She turned around and broke free from Lady Eve's touch. However, Lady Eve quickly reined herself in. She crossed her arms in front of her stomach and smiled elegantly. Facing Zhong Luoyue, who was looking at her strangely, she asked gently, "Is something the matter, Miss Zhong?" Unexpectedly, Zhong Luoyue's eyes widened. There was even a trace of panic in them. She looked at Lady Eve and suddenly took a step back. She let out a startled and uncertain voice. "You, me?" Lady Eve smiled again. She seemed to have sensed that something was wrong with her. She tilted her head slightly and looked at the mirror next to her. In the full-body mirror, Lady Eve's body was graceful and charming. However, there was something between her lips that ruined this normal beauty. "You accidentally exposed yourself." Madame Eve covered her mouth with her hand and chuckled. Fangs appeared between her lips. "You? What are you?" Zhong Luoyue forced herself to calm down and asked tentatively, "Or is this just a prank, Lady Eve?" She didn't believe that such a thing existed in the world. However, since she used some tricks to get a mysterious black card back from her second brother, she felt that she seemed to have come into contact with some unusual things. Especially when she couldn't figure out the material of the black card after asking people to study it for a long time. In the end, she privately visited an old man who was in the same generation as her grandfather. At the same time, he was also an elder of another family that didn't belong to the Zhong family. However, she still found it hard to believe. She had more reasons to believe that this Lady Eve was just a disguise. For example, because of some hobby, she specially wore a pair of vampire's fake teeth. However, it was clear that today's event was not a masquerade. "A prank?" Lady Eve laughed, her big breasts surging. "Miss Zhong, is this based on fear and self-protection?" She walked towards Zhong Luoyue step by step, causing Zhong Luoyue to instinctively retreat. At the same time, the fear in Zhong Luoyue's heart grew stronger, because in just a few steps, Lady Eve turned from a beautiful woman in the eyes of men to an old woman. The wrinkles on her face were like withered tree bark, and her shiny skin had almost turned gray. Her body was rapidly losing weight. No word could describe her current appearance. Lady Eve's laughter was like the sound of wind blowing dry leaves on a cement road, making one's scalp tingle. I really hate the existence of mirrors at this time. Lady Eve waved her hand, and the full-body mirror shattered in an instant. Zhong Luoyue did not have time to be frightened by this scene, because the moment the mirror shattered, Lady Eve had already reached out to grab her. Lady Eve's withered hand was far stronger than a burly adult male's. Zhong Luoyue felt as if her shoulder was about to be crushed. But she was not really frightened to the extent that she was completely dumbfounded. In this generation of the Zhong family, 2 sons and 1 daughter were sent by grandfather Zhong to train since they were young. Although Zhong Luoyue's time in the military was shorter than her eldest and second brothers, she still learned some real self-protection skills. When faced with danger, she immediately calmed down and quickly hit Lady Eve's neck with her palm. This chop was not as powerful as those annoying karate masters who could chop bricks, but it was definitely not as simple as a normal person being hit by a chop. However, Madame Eve was unmoved. She didn't even move. She just chuckled. They actually resisted before. No, it should be said that they struggled. But someone like you is still the first one. I originally preferred the younger one I met in the vineyard, but your performance is really good. I think it's a good idea to let you become my blood servant. Zhong Luoyue did not know who Lady Eve was referring to by them, but without a doubt, they were most likely the victims in Lady Eve's hands. Worse, they were probably already dead. Zhong Luoyue did not have the time to create more opportunities for herself to obtain more information. Right now, she only wanted to escape from this great danger. She quickly retracted her palm from Lady Eve's neck and hit the elbow of Lady Eve's arm that was grabbing her shoulder. It caused Lady Eve's arm to bend a little, and Zhong Luoyue's shoulder loosened. Zhong Luoyue did not miss this opportunity. Instead, she used a side kick straight at Lady Eve's head. However, Zhong Luoyue's ankle was caught in an instant. Lady Eve sneered and grabbed Zhong Luoyue's ankle. She suddenly flung it. Zhong Luoyue's whole body was thrown into the air and heavily hit the corner of the wall. She let out a painful groan. A monstrous strength. Zhong Luoyue clearly realized that Lady Eve was not an enemy that could be defeated with just some fighting skills. She crawled up in a slight panic and pressed on her shoulder at the same time. This shoulder was grabbed and thrown to the wall, so it was already injured. Lady Eve calmly walked over at this time. More of the superiority came from facing a creature that was far weaker than herself. Oh no, it should be food. Zhong Luoyue was currently drenched in cold sweat and panting rapidly. She looked at Lady Eve's footsteps and saw that Lady Eve was closing in on her. Finally, Lady Eve was only an arm's length away from her. Have you given up resisting? Lady Eve revealed a creepy smile and slightly opened her mouth at the same time. In an instant, Zhong Luoyue's eyes became sharp and her uninjured arm shot out like lightning. At the same time, a loud sound burst out at the same time. Lady Eve's eyes widened and her body suddenly froze. Her eyeballs rolled up, not to roll her eyes, but to look at her own forehead. But obviously, she couldn't see it. At the center of Lady Eve's forehead, there was a small bloody hole, and Zhong Luoyue was holding a long lipstick in her hand. In other words, it was a weapon disguised as a lipstick. The last life-saving measure. Zhong Luoyue looked at her lipstick. It was made of ceramic, and even the bullet was made of ceramic, so it could pass the metal detection test before the banquet. But it could only shoot 1 bullet and its power was not comparable to a real pistol, but it was enough to kill. After being shot in the forehead, Lady Eve's body slowly fell down, but she obviously didn't die. Under Zhong Luoyue's incredulous gaze, the wound on Lady Eve's forehead started to wriggle little by little, and the bullet that was shot into her brain was slowly pushed out at this time. This kind of monster couldn't be defeated by human strength. Once this thought came to her mind, fear surged like a tide. Zhong Luoyue suddenly shivered and rushed out of the door before Lady Eve recovered her ability to move. However, what she didn't know was that an even greater danger, an even more terrifying thing, and an abyss of fear was behind this door. The moment she opened the door, she saw a real monster appear in the venue of the banquet where so many guests were gathered. Its hands and feet were pressed on the ground, and its hair was extremely long. Its facial features were no longer the facial features of a human. The round mouth that occupied almost half of its face was lined with sharp teeth. At the same time, the tongue that was sticking out from the mouth was unbelievably thick and long. At this moment, it was really a tentacle-like tongue that was coiling around a woman and lifting her up high. At the end of the tongue, there was another organ that was used to bite people. It was biting on the neck of the woman who was coiled around. In midair, the long tongue was like a straw, and the woman's body was quickly sucked dry. Around her, there were more withered corpses with faces full of fear and despair. However, most of the guests were scared out of their wit. They hid under the ridiculous table or curled up in the corner. This hellish scene, Zhong Luoyue instantly felt like she had fallen into an ice cellar. What kind of abyss have I fallen into? Zhong Luoyue looked back in horror, only to see Lady Eve's body twitching and slowly standing up. She was shocked, but she still didn't care too much, and only wanted to escape from this place. Before Lady Eve completely recovered and before the blood-sucking monster noticed her. Escape. 10 minutes ago. The banquet had started for some time, and when many guests were discussing how this new batch of wine was compared to the previous ones, the program that they had been waiting for a long time finally arrived. He didn't know where he had heard the rumor. Rumor had it that at this wine party, Wine Master Tushini would take out the legendary daylily, River of Forgetfulness, and drink it with a lucky person. The same series of daylily wine was once sold at a sky-high price in an auction, and for many people who loved wine, it was like a dream wine. Under everyone's expectation, a man slowly walked out at this time, and at the same time, he pushed out a huge roulette. It was the man who took out the magical treasure ball in the banquet hall not long ago. The rich man who wanted to buy this treasure ball recognized it immediately. The person who pushed the roulette was Takizawa. He pushed the roulette to the front of everyone's sight, then smiled and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, the next moment will be an exciting moment. Do you know what I'm going to do next? Everyone held their breath, looking at Takizawa's face with a smile. Takizawa said loudly, I believe that before entering the banquet hall, you have already received a crystal ball with a number engraved on it, right? Now, please let me see the crystal ball in your hands, okay? The ladies took out the crystal ball and held it in front of them. At this time, Takizawa turned his body very beautifully in front of everyone, and then held the edge of the huge roulette with both hands. His eyes flashed with a strange light, and he continued to say loudly, See this roulette? See the number on this roulette? Ladies and gentlemen, you are smart. Have you guessed what I'm going to do next? Answer me. Have you guessed it? I guessed it. The ladies' voices were more prominent. At this time, Takizawa suddenly used his strength to turn the huge roulette, and the rapidly spinning roulette was like a whirlpool. Finally, under everyone's nervous waiting, the roulette slowly stopped. The needle finally stopped at the range representing the number 18. At this time, Takizawa opened his hands and said loudly, Please tell me, where is the lucky one? It's me. It's me. It was the rich man who wanted to buy the treasure ball before. He raised the crystal ball in his hand, looking very proud, and happily pushed the crowd away, and walked in front of Takizawa. It's me. We meet again. Yes, we meet again. Takizawa smiled. Mr. Lucky One. Chapter 879. Like a monster, the stout man's body, which was being lifted up, was rapidly drying up. The moment it happened, the scene was silent. Someone suddenly screamed, and the scene instantly turned into a disaster scene. They scrambled to push each other as they fled towards the exit. They couldn't care less about anything else. At this time, after Takizawa sucked the stout man dry, he suddenly jumped up and landed on a table covered with a white cloth. Like an animal, his 4 limbs were pressed on the table, and the long tongue that extended out from the huge mouth, the long tongue that looked like a straw, was swaying in front of him. Suddenly, the long tongue shot out and easily wrapped around a woman who fell to the ground and sprained her knee because she was pushed and pulled. Takizawa didn't pay attention to the people who fled in fear. Instead, he concentrated on enjoying his food. Because he didn't need to. Because the guests who fled in panic found that the exit leading to the outside, had been completely blocked. In front of the door, an iron gate fell down instantly. When the first guest ran to the exit, intending to escape with his life, his body slammed into the iron gate, and fear erupted. There was no way out in front, and behind them, the blood-sucking monster was slaughtering their own kind one by one. Someone's head was twisted and then raised high. Blood gushed out from the broken head like a waterfall. Takizawa raised his head and drank the warm liquid. He was like a grasshopper with the jumping ability of a blood-sucking leech, constantly flying in the hall to catch his prey. No, it should be reaching out to get his food. Simple, violent, and bloody. Some people had already fainted from fear. However, the fear didn't stop because of this. This was the scene that Zhong Luoyue saw when she opened the door after temporarily escaping from Lady Eve. When Lady Eve regained her ability to move and rushed out of the small room alone, less than a minute had passed. Zhong Luoyue only had enough time to hide behind a huge vase in this hall. Because there was no place to escape, more people were more willing to block the blocked exit, crazily shouting and slapping, but it was useless. At this moment, Lady Eve rushed out of the door with anger, turned into a black wind, and suddenly caught a woman who was crying in fear and had her makeup removed. Lady Eve directly bit the woman's neck, but her fierce eyes were still sweeping back and forth in the hall. Obviously, she was already planning who the next prey would be. After sucking the woman's blood, Madame Eve pushed her away. The woman was already on the verge of death. Lady Eve's body at this time had recovered some plumpness, but her eyes had already fallen on the vase. But Lady Eve didn't go there. However, at this time, Zhong Luoyue could hear Lady Eve's voice. As if she was whispering softly in her ears. She said, "I won't touch you immediately. I will let you crawl towards me in fear and despair, then beg me to let you go, beg me to let you go, beg me to let you become my blood slave. Because, by becoming my blood slave, you won't die here, you will be able to leave, you will be able to breathe the fresh air, and you will be able to see the outside world again. You will, you will." Zhong Luoyue suddenly covered her ears, lowered her head. She had never felt so powerless before. The daughter of the top aristocratic family, the all-powerful trendsetter in the business world, in the face of this inhuman power, those things that could be relied on were useless. But suddenly, a crashing sound came, followed by Lady Eve's angry voice. Zhong Luoyue poked her head out to take a look, only to see Lady Eve hit a table and directly fell to the ground. At this time, in the center of the hall, stood a tall and sturdy man with abnormally solid muscles. At this moment, his legs were in a horse stance, making a posture of pushing out his right palm. Was he the one who sent Lady Eve flying with one palm? Takizawa had already noticed this scene. He had already fallen into a frenzied state. He didn't think much, and instantly rushed towards the man who knocked down Lady Eve. Takizawa's body leaped high. However, just as he was about to pounce on the man, Takizawa suddenly shot out his tongue. His tongue pressed against the floor. Using this as leverage, Takizawa abruptly changed his direction. Takizawa seemed to be dodging something. It was a flying knife. No, it should be a table knife. In the direction that Takizawa had deliberately dodged, 3 table knives suddenly appeared. They were lined up in a row and nailed to the huge turntable. There was another one? Zhong Luoyue used her eyesight to look. she saw a slightly thin man among the curled-up crowd also stood up at this time. She didn't know where these two men came from, but it seemed that they had the ability to deal with Lady Eve and Takizawa. "Song-san, have you seen Miss?" At this time, the huge man in a horse stance loudly asked the thin man at this time. Song-san shook his head. "I haven't seen her, maybe she didn't come down." "Song-da, you and Song-air leave first, quickly find Miss. I will hold these two monsters." "Song-san. Song-da? Surname Song?" Zhong Luoyue frowned at this time, her heart moved. These two guys who jumped out, perhaps there was a person called Song-air hiding in the dark. Could it be the people of the Song family? Were they secretly sent to protect Song Ying's safety? In just a moment, Zhong Luoyue was almost sure of this speculation. Although the Song family was powerful, it was not as prosperous as the Zhong family. After all, the Song family only had two descendants. The old man of the Song family couldn't let Song Ying, the only granddaughter of the Song family, run around outside and not care about it. "That's great." Zhong Luoyue secretly rejoiced. This master of the Song family seems to have some real skills. "Human warriors! How did you sneak in here?" Takizawa was obviously enraged. Without saying anything, he rushed towards Song-da again. However, Song-san hurriedly waved his hand at this time, shooting out a cold light, impressively picking up the scattered table knives on the ground. At this moment, Lady Eve had already climbed up from the ground, but there was a very conspicuous dent on her abdomen. She was actually heavily injured by Song-da. "I like strong men, especially men like you," Lady Eve screamed, also rushing towards Song-da. Just that in the hall, a figure suddenly shot down from above, quickly kicking towards Lady Eve. It was a leg shadow that was too fast for the eyes to take in. It seemed to be an expert in leg martial arts. It should be Song-air. "Ada, you go open the door." At this time, Song-air used leg martial arts to suppress Lady Eve at the same time as he shouted. Hearing this, Song-da also shouted, angrily said, "Get out of the way!" Those guests who were blocking the iron gate at this time all squeezed out at this time, only to see Song-da running step by step. His footsteps were unusually heavy. Every time he stepped on the ground, it was like using an iron hammer to hit the floor, making a loud noise. Song-da came in front of the iron gate, suddenly put his palms in front of his chest, then took a deep breath. The muscles on his arms instantly swelled, actually bursting the clothes on his hands, turned into a giant arm, twice as thick as an ordinary person, and instantly struck out. Bang! The palm fiercely hit the iron gate, actually the solid iron gate, forcibly broke open. Song-da took the lead at this time, directly rushed out, only his voice came from the front of the passage. "Ah-san, don't fight. Find the miss, immediately evacuate, I will give you a signal." Even so, the iron gate has been broken by the godlike Song-da. Those guests at this time were not willing to stay in such a dangerous place, immediately scattered, scrambling to escape. Of course, this included the Zhong family's third miss, Zhong Luoyue. But in her heart suddenly flashed a thought, Song family has such a hidden martial arts master. I don't know if the Zhong family has such a master or not. Grandpa, there are still a lot of things tightly hidden in the heart, including the origin of that black card. In the crowd, there were people constantly pushing her body forward to escape. Zhong Luoyue at this time did not have time to think about it. "Damn, I actually let these food escape." Takizawa's voice has completely changed, gloomy and terrifying. At this time, after Song-air forced Lady Eve back with a kick, he quickly jumped back and just happened to land beside Song-san. Song-air at this time said with a dignified face, "Song-san, these two monsters are not easy to deal with. That old witch took so many of my mighty King Kong leg, but nothing happened. Ada's King Kong palm also hit her. Didn't she still stand up? That is a 5-inch iron plate that can be broken through." Song-san's face was not good at this time. "This is great. I thought it was just a simple guard mission with food and drinks, but I am afraid this is a job that will cost me my life. Song Air said, Don't say any more. If the master did not take us 3 brothers in that year, I am afraid we will have to return all our kung fu to the Shaolin Temple. 18 years later, we are still good men. What are we afraid of? However, while the two were talking, a black shadow suddenly shot out, went straight past them, and went towards the entrance of the passage. Just when Song Air and Song San were about to chase, a huge figure fell in front of them. Takizawa. I will play with you, I hope you don't disappoint me. Takizawa laughed crazily, and at this time, his body suddenly split into 2, turning into 2 slightly smaller individuals, at the same time more like a leech monster. Song Air and Song San looked at each other at this time. Song San took a deep breath at this time and stood out first. Monster, you forced me? I didn't intend to use this forbidden power. Song San took a deep breath and let his chest swell up. Takizawa and his doppelganger at this time bowed, staring at Song San, and did not move for a while. Although he was manic, he did not lose his mind. Song San suddenly shouted at this time, pushed out his hands, and suddenly a handful of small things were shot at Takizawa and his doppelganger. But it did not hurt at all. The small things fell to the ground with a clang. They were some candy that no one cared about at the banquet. Takizawa could not help but be stunned. Go! At this time, Song San shouted loudly, and the 2 of them ran away in the blink of an eye, leaving no trace behind. Haidasir finally felt that the pressure on his body disappeared. He quietly breathed a sigh of relief, feeling like he was reborn. He saw that Luochio had sat back in his original place at this time, and then pointed to his side. But Luochio quickly pointed to another single sofa on the side, and said indifferently, Sit. Haidasir gulped, slowly got up, and at the same time touched the black ring on his finger. This was a product of the Magician Association. It could be sensitive to powerful energy, and at the same time it could be trained. For example, he trained himself that once there was an entity that could threaten his energy, the ring would send a warning. But obviously, in front of Luochio, this ring seemed to be malfunctioning. Haidasir looked at Luochio with fear. He did not know when such a powerful guy appeared in the dark world. Looking at him, he did not seem to have the characteristics of other non-human races. He looked like an ordinary human. Could he be a psychic? Don't worry, I don't plan to do anything to you now. Luochio looked at Haidasir and said indifferently, And I believe that you won't have any strange thoughts about me now. Haidasir smiled embarrassedly. How would he dare? Or rather, even if you have any strange thoughts about me, I will be happy to cooperate. What is the true blood you mentioned just now? Luochio began to ask. He always felt that it was hard to resist the other party's questions, and he would always be happy to tell him the answer in his heart. Haidasir was surprised in his heart, but he also slowly said, The so-called true blood is a product specially made to replace the vampire's dependence on blood, or rather, a substitute for blood. You live on blood, but now you want to make a substitute that may replace blood. Why is that? Luochio was puzzled. It was like humans invented a substitute drink. But that thing was generally used by dieters. But vampires obviously did not need to lose weight, right? Haidasir smiled bitterly and said, We have no choice. Luochio, how much do you know about the current vampire community? Luochio said indifferently, My family has told me a little about the 13 clans. Family? Haidasir looked at Luochio, and his heart became more and more cautious. A powerful guy like Luochio has a family? Could this be a guy from a lost family? Well, I will start with the 13 clans. Haidasir nodded, then pondered for a moment and finally sat down. That single sofa. Yin 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 yin. Chapter 880. Over the years, the 13 clans were divided into 4 different formations according to different formations. The Secret Alliance, the Devil's Feast Alliance, the Independent Clan, and the Extinct Clan. For thousands of years, the 13 clans had been in constant conflict because of their respective ideals. Internal strife was not just a purely human trait. According to Citacil, the strife between the various factions had developed from a real battle to a competition in different fields. But no matter what, they all followed the same idea: to work together to create a world that was better suited for the survival of vampires. Even if they had internal strife, they would still be united when facing external enemies. When they were separated, they were also unusually united. Therefore, in the Dark World, the vampire community could be maintained. It could be said that it was because of the existence of the 13 clans that the vampire dynasty lasted for thousands of years. However, the 13 clans were not the only vampires. Other than the 13 clans, there were still other vampires. For example, the Takizawa clan, who reincarnated into vampires through a forbidden technique, the famous Impaler Duke in history, or the descendants of the vampire Lily from another myth, and so on. The 13 clans had always considered themselves to be pure-blooded and orthodox, placing themselves at the bottom of the pyramid of the vampire community. Over the years, even if there were vampires who were strong enough to fight against a certain clan, they could not really participate in the Patriarch Society established by the 13 clans. Although there was no such thing as the Vampire Emperor, the Patriarch Society of the 13 clans was like the king of the vampire community. Citacil sighed and said, "In fact, it is not only in terms of strength that the 13 clans are the most powerful. In other places, those weak families rely too much on the 13 clans. And the most important thing is that the 13 clans strictly control the production of pure-blooded and purifying potions." Pure-blooded, purifying potions? Luoqiu raised two questions. Citacil subconsciously shrunk his neck, feeling that he would become a traitor who wanted to reveal the secrets of the clan to outsiders in a state that he did not know. But Citacil still nodded. Pure-blooded, that is, pure blood. The pure blood was provided by the blood thralls that the 13 families had raised since ancient times. Most of them lived in the territories of the 13 families, and some of them didn't even know that they existed as blood thralls. Every one of the 13 clans had their own pure blood production base. It was very secretive, and outsiders had no way of knowing about it. Legend has it that in every pure blood production area, there is still a primitive way of life. Modern civilization has never invaded, and because of this, the pure blood production can be maintained. Luoqiu frowned. You said that modern civilizations cannot invade. What do you mean? Haidasir said, poison. The blood of the humans of today is unhealthy for us. Our conclusion is that with the advanced development of modern civilization, various kinds of pollution have invaded the human body. Viruses from promiscuity, chemicals that settle in the body due to taking too many synthetic substances. These are all toxins to us. The pure blood production base, apart from the fixed supply of the 13 families, only a small amount can be exported, but it is basically unable to supply the rest of the clansmen. The distribution is uneven. You should be able to imagine that some contradictions are inevitable. Luoqiu nodded. Then what is the purifying potion? Citacil said, I said before, the supply of pure blood is limited, but for countless years, our population has been growing. You know, vampires have long lives, and they are scattered in different parts of the world. We cannot control our nature, and we need to survive. In the situation where we are unable to obtain pure blood, hunger will make us crazy, and instinct will defeat our rationality. We will still choose to consume unhealthy blood. Those toxins will accumulate in our bodies, and it will make us weak, causing our life to quickly deplete. Thus, the purifying potion was created. It was jointly developed by independent clans and extinct clans. It is an antibody that allows us to effectively resist these toxins, but it also needs to be used regularly to maintain. Citacil shook his head and said rather helplessly, the 13 families almost control the two most important things for our survival. Even if we occasionally want to resist, in the end there is nothing we can do. Until the concept of pure blood was proposed. A type of pure blood that can be artificially synthesized to replace pure blood, a pollution-free substitute. Do you know what this means for the clansmen who are oppressed? Luocchio pondered for a moment before slowly saying, freedom. Freedom. Citacil nodded heavily. If we can grasp the creation of pure blood, it is equivalent to grasping the power to resist the dictatorship of the 13 families. We will rely on the existence of pure blood to rapidly develop, gather into a force, and fiercely enter the Council of Patriarchs to obtain the right to speak. Luocchio was silent for a while before suddenly saying, the 14th family? Citacil opened his mouth and then said with a wry smile, your gaze makes one feel fear. Indeed, some of us have indeed proposed this idea and have been active because of it. Let's hear it, Luocchio said indifferently. What does this have to do with you being here today? I represent the Fernandez family, Citacil said. This is also an ancient family of vampires. In addition, there is also the force behind Lady Eve, the Takizawa family behind Mr. Takizawa, Elizabeth's clansmen, and finally there is Karen, which is us. Tushini is a descendant of Karen, and at the same time, he is the provider and researcher of pure blood. Over the years, we have been supporting him in researching pure blood, but for many years we have been unable to succeed. Almost all we can get are semi-finished products, and the effects are not ideal. After many years of research, only one batch of usable products with better effects than pure blood was born, and that is the Daylily series. Luocchio asked in puzzlement, since pure blood is the method you intend to use to create the 14th family and enter the Patriarch Society, it should be quite confidential, right? Then why did you let the world know about the Daylily series and sell it in such a high-profile manner at the auction? Moreover, there is a legend that it disappeared after being drunk by rich merchants? That is just a cover. Citacil sighed and said, the 13 families are very strict in their control and monitoring of their clansmen. I am afraid they have vaguely noticed something. So, we thought of a way. Instead of hiding it, it is better to make it public in a high-profile manner. We will show this almost complete pure blood in a different manner. At the same time, we also reported this plan to the Patriarch Society. Citacil paused and said, well, you should know that the immortals are not really immortals. It is just that it is very difficult for us to die due to natural causes. But humans have mastered many methods to kill us. Apart from demon fighters, some of the weapons that humans possess also make us fearful. We only want to survive, not to hope for an all-out war with humans. So, any act of sucking blood needs to be reported. So, at that time we planned an auction. Me, Eve, and Elizabeth's father bought these 3 Daylily series at a high price, using this to make Tushini famous. This way, Tushini, who has become a master winemaker, has the ability to attract a large number of people to come find him. So, in the past 20 years, every time Tushini opens a new red wine, there will be a wine tasting, and then it will be the day you eat? Citacil nodded and said, yes, we need to keep doing this so that the Patriarch Society will not suspect us. Because what we do not lack the most is time. The Patriarch Society's patience is beyond imagination. It is only in the past 1 or 2 years that their supervision over us has gradually relaxed. The rumor of that rich merchant? Elizabeth's father? Citacil hesitated for a moment and finally said, he really disappeared after drinking the red spider lily. This is a situation that we did not expect. Afterwards, we can only say to the Patriarch Society that this is a deliberate illusion to add to the legend of Tushini. Luocchio said, don't you know what will happen to the red spider lily after it drinks the almost complete true blood? Isn't it strange that you can't predict it? No, we really don't know. Citacil hurriedly said, the Daylily series was inadvertently produced by Tushini. He indeed said so. At first, it can indeed replace pure blood, but later we found out that after drinking each of them, there will be some side effect. The red spider lily can make people see their deceased lover, making people die of heart. Every true blood has a strange ability. The red spider lily can make people die of heart. Limbo can give vampires the ability to split, but at the same time, it can also split their personality, making them have to endure the torture of two different thoughts every day. 97 foot can give the vampire great power after drinking it, but at the same time, it will make the vampire's body become old. Every half a month, the vampire will lose all their power, becoming as weak as a 97-year-old man. This will last for an entire day. The Huang Quan that I possess brings fear. Citisil smiled bitterly and said, "It has the ability to let you summon the souls of the dead, but every day, it will bring you the pain of death. Of course, you won't die a true death, but every time it happens, it will be so real. You won't feel numb, but the fear will only deepen every time. Until one day you can no longer bear it, living a life worse than death, wishing you could die for real." "You don't look like you've drunk it." Luocio shook his head. Citisil shrugged and said, "Of course, I haven't tried it myself, but it is not difficult to collect sample data, right? Because my tester could not bear the fear of death. He was willing to be exposed to the scorching sun, burning himself to death." "What about 3 lives and forgetfulness?" Luocio asked directly. "Strictly speaking, 3 lives is not a wine, but a special gem," Citisil said, "but as long as it is placed in clean spring water, it can turn the spring water into sweet and mellow wine. It is said that 3 lives can make people dream of their previous life and awaken the memories of their previous life. It is said. 3 lives is Karen's. She said it herself, but whether it is true or not, we don't know." Citisil shook his head and said, "Before this, Karen suddenly sent 3 lives to me and asked me to bring it here. I wanted to test it myself before I started, but the 3 lives gem has Karen's secret seal on it, so I can't open it. It can only be opened by Tushini, because Tushini is Karen's descendant and has her blood. There is also the forgetfulness and the last one. It seems that the last one has not been named." Luocio nodded. Citisil's face suddenly showed some fear. "Strictly speaking, the forgetfulness is poison. For us, it is the most poisonous medicine. Once we drink it, our bodies will rot and turn into a pool of pus and blood. But for ordinary people, it is no different from ordinary red wine. It can even make ordinary people happy. As for the last one, it has not been named because it has not been truly brewed yet. It has not been opened and is hidden in Tushini's hands. This time, it happens to be the 3rd hunting day this year, and Tushini sent us an invitation. Not only that, he even said in the letter that the true blood has been researched and will be revealed on the day of the hunting day, but he asked us to return the Daylily series. We guessed that the true blood might be the last Daylily series. After finally finishing, Citisil looked at Luocio with apprehension, fearing that this guy who could easily kill him would not let him go so easily. "I have already told you the secret of the true blood. If you are also interested in the true blood, I can help you get it." "What do I need the true blood for?" Luocio asked in amusement. Citisil said, "If Tushini really succeeds in researching the true blood, then you, who have the true blood, will bring a huge impact to the vampire tribe. You will even have the ability to gain the support of a large number of vampires in a short time," and before Citisil could finish his description, Luocio waved his hand and stopped Citisil from speaking. "I am not interested in your food substitutes. If there is anything I am interested in, it is this Daylily series, especially the red spider lily and 3 lives, which sound very interesting." Citisil stood up at this time and said with a burning gaze, "Luocio, my friend, no. Lord Luocio, I have witnessed your strength. Even a 5th-generation vampire can't defeat me so easily. You are even comparable to a 4th generation or even a 3rd generation undying. Please let me follow by your side. I will represent the Fernandez family and pledge my loyalty to you." At the same time, Fernandez quietly glanced at the ring on his hand. There was a faintly discernible crack. It was not that it did not react to Luaccio, but because the reaction was too strong, it had directly shattered in an instant. Even the power of a fourth-generation vampire could not break the ring. A third generation was already at the level of the patriarchs of the 13 clans. The vampire Impaler Duke, who was so powerful that he created a terrifying legend, was only equivalent to a third generation. Luocio looked Hidesil up and down and shook his head. It's a pity that I got the wrong script, so your loyalty is useless to me. But we can be friends. Oh, I am talking about ordinary friends, nothing else. Moreover, maybe we will have a chance to do business in the future. At the same time, the surface of the red wine bottle on the table suddenly shook slightly, rippling with ripples. Citisil subconsciously looked in a certain direction and frowned slightly. It seems that they have started hunting, but it seems a little too extreme? Chapter 881. If there was anyone else who was most familiar with the underground labyrinth apart from Citisir, it would naturally be the current owner of the castle, Tushini. In fact, in addition to some of the announced remodeled stone rooms, there were also many secret rooms here. For example, the secret room that Hydesir had initially used to greet Luaccio. Another example would be the place where Tushini was currently located. This place was more like a laboratory hidden deep underground. There were a large number of instruments here that Hydesir and the other vampires had obtained with their abilities. Some were even state-level technological products. There were a large number of huge containers in the laboratory. Inside the containers were many corpses preserved in a special liquid. Almost all of them were different specimens. There were human corpses, huge werewolves, beautiful fishmen with tails, and even vampires. These were the corpses that Hydesir and the others had hunted from all over the world for Tushini's research institute. At this moment, in a pure white room in the laboratory, Tushini was sitting quietly, looking at the screen on the wall. The screen was completely flat with the wall. At this moment, it was showing the scene of Takizawa, revealing his monstrous body, and frantically hunting. Tushini only gave it a few glances. Even when Songda, Song Air, and Song San appeared in the crowd behind him, there was no change in his expression. He appeared to be waiting for something. In front of him, on the white table, there were different containers. They were the Daylily series that Hydesir had obtained. Tushini was waiting for one of the cups. The cup contained fresh spring water with a red crystal inside. At this moment, the clean spring water was slowly turning red. There was also an old notebook next to it. Tushini fetched another cup. Then, he took out the resurrection lily from Elizabeth, opened it, and poured it into the cup. After that, he personally drank a mouthful. Tushini closed his eyes and quietly waited. Suddenly, Tushini revealed a pained expression, and then tightly grasped his heart. The pain didn't last long. Tushini's expression began to relax. He took a deep breath and took out the second vial of yellow spring. He poured out some more and personally tried it. He would personally try each bottle, except for the 3 lives and the river of forgetfulness. And every time he drank a different one, Tushini would personally experience the side effects. It would become painful, but he would quickly recover. It was only during the final Naiha that Tushini did not show any signs of abnormality. He snorted, "Takizawa, you sly bastard." Tushini took a deep breath and calmed down. He picked up the notebook beside him and flipped through it. He flipped through it page by page, looking very serious. Only when he flipped to the last page, Tushini's eyes changed. That was because the last few pages of the notebook had been torn off and gone missing. He had flipped through this notebook countless times. What is the formula? Tushini slowly closed his eyes. But in the blink of an eye, Tushini opened his eyes. He reached out and grabbed the cylindrical vessel containing the Naiha and smashed it on the screen on the wall. All of you will die. Tushini's eyes became cold. He reached out and pressed a button on the edge of the table. In an instant, the wall on one side of the room cracked open. A man who was missing a finger and only wore a black finger ring slowly walked out. He was the gambling demon Jean Wu City's Uncle Jean. Uncle Jean also held a remote control in his hand. He came to Tushini's side and put the remote control in front of Tushini. Tushini just glanced at it, then looked at Uncle Jean and said coldly, "Oh Yang Jia, you haven't sent him away yet?" Uncle Jean said expressionlessly, "No one in the castle knows what happened in the maze of the cellar. Besides, Ajay is asleep now, it doesn't matter if you don't send him away. Moreover, the woman he likes is still inside, you see." Tushini said, "I have no interest in this little rascal's romance. That girl insisted on coming, what does it have to do with me?" Uncle Jean sighed and said indifferently, "Then what you promised me." Tushini stood up and stared at Uncle Jean. "Don't worry, I promise to give you immortality, I won't break my promise. You have been serving me all these years, I won't forget. After this matter is over, I will fulfill your wish. Now do it." "I hope so." Uncle Jean nodded. He silently picked up the remote control and slowly pressed it. At the same time, some of the hidden doors in the maze suddenly opened, and some of the fellows who had been trapped in those doors were released. Project True Blood. In the place where all the people involved were gathered, Amonst didn't relax for a moment, his gaze always on Elizabeth. His fingers slowly squeezed the stamina-replenishing potion that Citasil had given him in his pocket, his heart heavy. Elizabeth was like an albino patient, and besides her albino symptoms, Elizabeth was actually no different from a 15 or 16-year-old girl. But Amonst knew that Elizabeth's true age was already over 30. It was only because she had spent most of her time sleeping that her body's growth had slowed down. Ever since Elizabeth was born, she had never really drunk human blood. She had been maintaining her life by injecting pure blood provided by the 13 clans. Every time, Amonst would personally inject the pure blood into Elizabeth, because he was Elizabeth's only remaining relative. Amonst's daughter, Elizabeth's mother, was a pure human. Elizabeth was a hybrid between a vampire and a human. Hybrids were not recognized by the 13 clans. Because of the existence of hybrids, it was equivalent to breaking the reproductive isolation between different races. The arrogant vampires, the older generation that had been holding on to the traditions of the vampire clan for countless years, saw this as a challenge to the pure vampire bloodline. The 13 clans recognized Elizabeth's existence because she did indeed have vampire blood. But at the same time, the 13 clans also didn't recognize Elizabeth's right to be a vampire, because half of her blood flowed through her body. Now, the 13 clans' supply of pure blood to Elizabeth was becoming less and less. In the end, they even had to use special methods to make Elizabeth sleep, to reduce the consumption of her body and delay the hunger of her body. He didn't allow Elizabeth to drink blood, and it was also his daughter Lola's last wish. Elizabeth was a kind child, and she herself also rejected the act of directly drinking blood. This was the only remaining grandchild, and in the past few decades, they had been working hard to achieve this goal, carefully advancing forward. Amonst knew that he was walking on a tightrope, and if he wasn't careful, he would fall into a bottomless abyss. Once he couldn't suppress the half of Elizabeth's vampire blood, all his efforts over the years would be in vain. All the pain Elizabeth had endured over the years would also be in vain. But Elizabeth's body was too hungry, and there were many times when the urge to drink blood destroyed Elizabeth's rationality. There were many times when Amonst managed to suppress Elizabeth with difficulty. He was old, and was no longer one of the 12 holy knights of the Round Table. His speed slowed down year by year, and his stamina weakened year by year. He even had to give up wearing armor in order to reduce the consumption of stamina. Amonst didn't know if he had the ability to suppress Elizabeth the next time she went berserk. Perhaps what awaited him was the end. Looking at Amonst lying on the table like a feverish patient, Amonst showed a pained expression in his half-awake state, the torment in his heart was no less than when he saw his own daughter die tragically at the hands of Elizabeth's father. That guy who endured the urge to drink blood all the time for love, in the end, his rationality was annihilated by instinct. That was why he supported Project True Blood, and that was why he drank the red spider lily. In fact, his heart had already died long ago, and he drank the red spider lily, just to see Elizabeth's mother again. If there is a God, why is he so cruel to this child? Amance slowly placed his palm on Elizabeth's forehead, feeling her body temperature that was far lower than normal people's. Even so, he knew that Elizabeth was suffering a burning pain at this moment. The hungry vampire blood was burning crazily, and it was attacking the persistence of this weak child. "Grandpa, I feel terrible." Elizabeth opened her eyes and tightly grabbed Amance's sleeve. At the same time, Amand held Elizabeth's hand tightly and whispered into her ear, "Elizabeth, mania is a common problem for vampires. But since you have chosen this path, you have to persevere. Every time you endure the madness, it is a success of your efforts. You are a persevering person, and fate always loves persevering people. This time, if Tushini really develops the perfect true blood, you will be able to obtain a new life. You will be like a normal person, living under the sun normally." "Grandpa," she twisted her body in pain, and her lips had already revealed the mark of a vampire, the blood-sucking fangs. Amance's heart suddenly softened, and he took out a small box from his pocket with trembling hands. Inside were the few remaining pure blood and the tools for injection. At this moment, Amance almost had the urge to inject the pure blood into Elizabeth immediately. But at the same time, he understood that if he injected the pure blood into Elizabeth on the day of madness, her vampire instincts would be stimulated even more. This was not the first time he had suffered such a loss. His heart had softened more than once. He was injured again and again because of this, and until now, he had no ability to stop the mistakes from happening. "Grandpa, I am so lucky." "Elizabeth." Amance opened the box with trembling hands and took out the tools for injection. His eyes were full of struggle, and at the same time they were wet. "Elizabeth, Grandpa. Grandpa will make you feel better." A drop of blood stuck to the tip of the needle did not drip down due to the tension of the liquid, but it swayed slightly. Every drop of pure blood was precious, and should not be wasted. However, Amance was in too much pain, and his trembling hands made it difficult for him to maintain his stability. No, at the moment when the needle was about to enter the vein on Elizabeth's arm, he heard Elizabeth's painful voice. Amance shuddered and slammed the syringe on the table. He grabbed his hair and said with a hoarse voice, What am I doing? I am sorry, Elizabeth." He was really old, and his heart had softened day by day. He no longer had the steel-like will of the past. Now, he was just a lonely old man who had lost his loved ones. Amance took a deep breath and once again grasped Elizabeth's hand, hoping to give her some courage to resist the pain. This was the only thing he could do. However, at this moment, a strange sound began to sound. Something was letting out a low growl like that of a wild beast. Amance instinctively felt that danger was approaching. He moved quickly and directly pulled out the umbrella sword and held it in his hand. At the same time, he quickly glanced at Elizabeth. The feeling of danger did not come from Elizabeth, but from outside the door. Bang dash! The sound of impact. Something was crazily hitting the door in front of him. Amance suddenly shouted, Tushini! Tushini! Come out! What the hell is going on? However, no matter how he shouted, he did not receive any response. The frequency of the door being slammed also became faster and faster. Finally, the door was smashed open. At the same time, what appeared in front of Amand was a rotting, stinking corpse that was barely recognizable. The corpse could move and was staggering toward Amance. Amance suddenly rushed forward and quickly waved his arm. The sharp, pure silver blade instantly chopped off the head of the rotting corpse, causing it to fall to the ground. However, the headless corpse did not stop but continued to move forward. At the same time, behind the corpse that broke through the door, a large number of rotten corpses were densely packed at the door. Zombies, a kind of failed product in the process of transforming into vampires. As one of the 12 holy knights of the Round Table, Amonst was no stranger to the cause of zombies. However, when he saw the number of zombies blocking the door, he could not help but gasp. Tushini built a research lab in the basement maze, not far from where we gathered. We should be arriving soon. While speaking, Haidasir observed Luochio. Haidasir was lucky to escape from the hands of this powerful undead and temporarily acted as a guide. He did not know if Luochio was really only interested in Lycoris flower and Sanshing, because as a dark merchant, Haidasir would have reservations about everything and anyone. Haidasir had already pledged his loyalty to Luochio, but the other party clearly did not intend to accept it. In a situation where he could not form a stable relationship, Haidasir was now thinking about how to get away from this dangerous guy, or rather, escape. There's a sound. Luochio suddenly stopped. Haidasir was stunned and took 2 steps forward. The two of them had just arrived at a relatively spacious place in the basement maze. There were many square pools around. These were used to store water, so the purpose was naturally for the people hiding. There's a sound. Haidasir looked around and finally his eyes fell on one of the pools. Perhaps it was because of the infiltration of the rainwater on the ground, this pool was actually half filled with water. At this time, the water surface was slightly fluctuating. Suddenly, a drop of liquid dripped from above and landed on the water surface, instantly creating circles of ripples. Haidasir subconsciously looked up. In the darkness above his head, countless tiny eyes appeared. They seemed to come from some kind of creature. Among the countless tiny eyes, there was a particularly large group of 8 eyes that suddenly blinked. Haidasir waved his hand, and his palm emitted an aquamarine light, allowing him to clearly see what was hidden in the darkness above the rock. However, at this moment, the place where the green light reached was filled with terrifying spiders. Their bodies were even larger than the tarantulas. Amidst this dense mass of terrifying spiders that covered the entire ceiling, there was actually a fellow with an incomparably large body. It was much larger than a bull. At this time, its body was standing upright and its 8 terrifying eyes were looking at Haidasir and Luochio at the same time. Why did Tushini release this thing? Haidasir's face was filled with shock. Yen PS1. Sure enough, it's impossible to update twice a day in a week. This week, I only returned 4 times, I still owe 3 times. Chapter 882. It was as though they had fallen into a spider's cave, and a mutated spider monster at that. That was especially true for the largest spider monster. It suddenly crawled on the ceiling, and some saliva flowed out from its huge mouth. The saliva dripped onto the floor and instantly corroded a part of the floor, causing white smoke to rise. Then, Haidasir's gaze shifted and he suddenly said, "Be careful. This is a terrifying product of Tushini's experiment. The acid it spits out can easily corrode even alloys. Moreover, it can also reproduce a large number of small spiders. These small spiders crawl very fast and contain very strong toxins. Once you get entangled by them, it will not be fun." "I've already been entangled." Luochio shook his head. Haidasir was taken aback. Then, he looked around in horror. The green light he released to illuminate the place had a very limited range. However, it could still illuminate other places while moving. At present, it was not just above them. Even below them, all around them, at an unknown time, these terrifying small spiders had filled up. Even though they were just small spiders, they were the size of 2 fists. They were densely packed and lined up around Luochio and Haidasir, forming a circle, trapping the 2 of them in the middle. Seeing this, Haidasir nervously took a step back. As soon as he retreated, the space between him and Luochio shortened. The spiders on the ground also instantly closed in on them. Suddenly, a terrifying little spider dropped down from above and landed in front of Haidasir. Haidasir quickly swiped his palm in front of him. The small spider that was hanging down was immediately torn apart. Luocio glanced at Haidasir's palm and found that his fingers had become very sharp, like cones. Blood vessels could be seen protruding from his palm. This was probably a way to strengthen his body. However, after the first small spider was torn apart by Haidasir, the other small spiders crawling on the ground instantly attacked. Their crawling speed was abnormally fast. In just the blink of an eye, they had crawled under Haidasir's feet. In the next instant, a large number of spiders covered Haidasir's entire body, completely wrapping him up. Haidasir let out a series of blood-curdling screams as he struggled in pain. After a few moments, he fell to the ground. However, more spiders crawled up, forming a small slope on the ground. It seemed that one of them had been eliminated. All the spiders, including the huge and terrifying spider, were now looking at Luocio. The small spiders, which were as dense as army ants in the desert, turned their bodies and began to gather towards Luocio. The huge spider above his head lowered its body and opened its mouth full of venomous fangs. There was no doubt that it could directly swallow an adult's head. The 8 eyes of the giant spider were all staring at Luocio. When the first spider touched Luocio's shoes and wanted to climb up his body, Luocio suddenly said, "Don't make trouble." The 8 eyes of the huge spider blinked. Luocio continued, "Be quiet." The giant spider and the countless small spiders on the ground blinked their eyes in unison. Luocio pointed at the water reservoirs and said, "Stay inside." In an instant, the spider that climbed up Luocio's shoes crawled down. The small spiders under his feet scattered in an instant, turning into a black curtain and crawling towards the surrounding water reservoirs as though they were going home. It was unknown how these small spiders managed to squeeze themselves into the water reservoirs with so many of them. After all the small spiders had squeezed in, only the huge spider was left. It fell from the ceiling, blinked its eyes, and then turned around frantically and jumped into one of the water reservoirs. It was unknown how many small spiders were killed by it. At this time, Luocio walked to the place where Haidasir had fallen and saw only a black horse clip left behind by Haidasir. However, the horse clip was badly damaged. Luocio grabbed the horse clip and glanced at it. Apart from that, he did not see any traces of Haidasir. It left quite quickly. Luocio shook his head and threw the horse clip on the ground. Then, he looked back at one of the water reservoirs. He saw the huge spider poking its head out. But the moment it saw Luocio looking at it, it shrank back. Luocio looked around, found a path, and walked out. The huge spider poked its head out again, but it could no longer see Luocio. It suddenly lowered its head. Although the contents inside were not very developed, it was still thinking about a problem. How long do I have to stay here? When can I go out? I am also in despair. I just came out. What can I do? I better not go out. That guy is too scary. The zombies' ability to move was very strong. Although they usually moved slowly, once they found a target to attack, it was as if the engine in their body was activated and they became crazy. Especially when it came into contact with flesh and blood like almonds. Even though he was an old man, the vigorous vitality in his body was the greatest temptation under the perception of the lost. Zombies rushed in one after another, but they fell one by one under a month's blade. This old man had rich combat experience and knew how to deal the highest damage to a zombie. However, there were too many zombies rushing in. After a while, Amundst was forced to the side of the table. He had no place to retreat because he needed to protect Elisabeth. Elisabeth, who was fighting against the blood-sucking ability, was confused and did not know what was happening outside. "Tushani, is this your doing?" The old man swung his sword and cut down another zombie, and let out an angry roar. "If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, I will use my sword to pierce your heart." He knew that this was a useless shout, but in his shock and anger, he had no choice but to vent some of it. Amundsen suddenly raised the blade in his hand, and a faint light began to shine on the blade, but at this time, Amundsen suddenly stopped and knelt on the ground. His face was full of pain, and he could only use the blade to support his body, while at the same time, he grasped his heart. You actually chose, this time. The powerful Holy Knight of the Round Table could not fight against the ruthlessness of time. His body had problems since a long time ago, especially in recent years. The frequency of heart attacks had increased a lot. At this time, a zombie took the opportunity to ram into Amundsen, and the huge force instantly knocked him to the ground and rolled a distance of 2 to 3 meters. A fishy taste instantly rushed up Amundsen's throat. His internal organs were probably damaged. However, at the moment when he was about to spit out blood, Amundsen used all his strength to cover his mouth. At the same time, he widened his eyes in pain and swallowed the blood back. But he still kept his mouth closed, so breathing became more difficult. Amundsen glanced at Elizabeth and relaxed a little. These zombies would be interested in fresh blood and flesh. At this time, Elizabeth's vampire blood was the most active, and it had covered her human part, so these zombies would temporarily ignore her existence. But once he was bitten to death by the zombies, it was not difficult for Amundsen to guess what would happen next, because these guys had no sense of reason. Gritting his teeth, Amund resolutely took out the medicine bottle that Hiddesil had given him and poured it into his mouth. It had to be said that this product from the Magicians' Association did indeed have a mysterious effect. In just a moment, Amundsen felt the pain in his heart ease and calm down, and a large amount of strength gushed out from his limbs. He seemed to have returned to the time when he was young. He suddenly stood up and swung his sword down, easily splitting apart a zombie's body. The endless energy that flowed out of his body not only allowed him to recover his stamina, but he was also able to use some of the sword techniques that he had not been able to use for a long time. He was no longer one of the Holy Knights of the Round Table. Since he betrayed the Holy Knight's motto, he had lost the protection of the Holy Knights and could no longer use the ancient power of the inheritance. But even so, he was still powerful. Amundsen, who had regained his strength, instantly held his sword and charged into the zombie crowd. His sword was so fast that only flashes of silver light could be seen. Silver Lightning, this was Amundsen's nickname. His sword skills were the fastest and most accurate among the Holy Knights. The slaughter was one-sided. When the last zombie that rushed and fell under Amundsen's sword, the old man finally loosened his mouth and slowly exhaled. But at the same time, the endless strength began to slowly fade. The effect of the potion would not last long, but to be able to recover 10% or 20% of his strength was already miraculous enough. But a new wave of zombies appeared at this time. Amundsen's face instantly changed. When he was young, he participated in the crusade against the zombies, so he knew the horror of the zombies. It was not their extraordinary strength, but their numbers. It was as if there was no end to them, as if they would never be able to kill all of you and would only maximize your strength. Back then, many trainee Holy Knights had died tragically in the hands of the endless zombie army. I can't stay here anymore. Amundsen wanted to bring Elizabeth out of this place, but the moment Amundsen turned around, he froze on the spot, and the expression on his face was not as simple as fear. Elizabeth did not know if it was appropriate to fall to the ground, from the table to the ground. At this time, beside Elizabeth, there was a small bottle. That bottle had been opened, and the thing inside had already flowed out. That was the bottle that contained the pure blood used to relieve Elizabeth's hunger. When did it fall out? Was it when she was hit by the zombies when she was suffering from angina? Amundsen looked at Elizabeth in horror, and at this time she suddenly opened her eyes. The pure blood was exposed to the air, and the smell of the blood stimulated Elizabeth's vampire instincts. This was the last straw that crushed her human will. Elizabeth suddenly opened her eyes, flipped her body over, and crawled on the ground, her mouth close to the pure blood that was flowing out of the bottle. Why, Lisbeth! No! Amundsen screamed in despair. But it was all too late. The moment the pure blood was sucked into her mouth, why Lisbeth suddenly raised her head, like an awakened lion. She opened her fangs, and let out a low roar that had been brewing in her throat for a long time. Why, Lisbeth! Amundsen instantly spat out a mouthful of blood. This was the congested blood that he had been suppressing for a long time. He did not dare to spit it out because he was afraid that the blood would trigger a reaction from Lisbeth, but it was all too late. A completely berserk vampire's blood would bring Lisbeth terrifying power, but Amundsen was powerless to stop it at this time. Her whole body was pressed against the ground, and at this time she was like an animal slowly crawling towards Amundsen. Amundsen suddenly took 2 steps back. He did not know if he still had the ability to suppress Lisbeth at this time. Amundsen's face instantly turned pale. However, the blood he spat out not only stimulated Lisbeth, it also stimulated the second wave of zombies. They suddenly became even crazier, letting out roars as they charged towards Amund without regard for anything else. But this seemed to be a serious provocation to Lisbeth at this moment. She stiffly turned her head to look at the zombies that were rushing towards her. Suddenly, a large amount of red vapor-like gas came out of Lisbeth's body. She did not choose to drink Amundsen's blood, but directly rushed into the second wave of zombies. Lisbeth, who had activated the vampire's blood, possessed great power. Every time, Amundsen had to use up his years of accumulation to barely be able to wake her up. Just to wake her up, not to defeat her. Lisbeth! Amundsen fell to the ground powerlessly. The effect of the stamina potion had disappeared, and the feeling of powerlessness almost deprived Amundsen of his ability to control his body. At this time, his eyes also became blurry. He only saw a petite figure, rampaging through the zombie crowd, simply and violently tearing apart zombies with her bare hands. Lisbeth! In the end, Amundsen could no longer hear the sound of zombies, but at the same time, he could not see Lisbeth's figure. She did not find Amundsen in the end. Perhaps it was the last bit of rationality that made her leave, let her rather look for other blood sources to replace Amundsen who was right in front of her. He hoped so, but at the same time, he was also in despair, because he was powerless to stop all of this. Amundsen suddenly felt a sharp pain in his body. He screamed, and saw that his leg was being crazily bitten by a zombie. The zombie's body was only left with its chest and left arm, but it still had the ability to move. Lisbeth did not kill the second wave of zombies, she only destroyed the second wave of zombies and then left. Those zombies that were lying on the ground and torn apart, those that only had half of their bodies left, or even just their heads and necks, at this moment, used all kinds of methods and began to rush towards Amundsen. Chapter 883. You think you've escaped and are safe, but in fact, you've just fallen into an even bigger trap. Until now, Jean Louis deeply felt the despair of escaping from the tiger's mouth and falling into the wolf's lair. The crowd that had escaped from the scene had dispersed at some point. As he walked, Jean Louis felt that many of the people in front of him had disappeared without him noticing. But when she turned around, there were only a few men and women around her. Their faces were naturally filled with fear. At this moment, they finally realized that the escape route they had taken was probably wrong. This cellar was like a maze. Without anyone to lead the way, they quickly realized a terrifying reality. They were lost. Where is the big guy who broke the door? Why did he leave us behind? A young man stamped his feet angrily. It's all your fault. I lost my way because I was following you. Another woman, at this time, angrily grabbed the man beside her. You are going to kill me! Jean Louis looked at these fellows in silence. Did they not know that Songde had no intention of saving anyone? He had only broken the gate so that he could leave earlier to find Song Ying? At this time, the dispute seemed to be escalating. Jean Louis looked at this scene coldly. Perhaps before the blood-sucking monster caught up with them, these people would self-destruct. She didn't want to participate in this escalating struggle, but slowly retreated. She didn't have time to stay here. Since she had lost a clear direction, even if she had to choose, she didn't want to stay here and wait for the threat of death. At this time, besides Zhong Luoyue, there was another girl who didn't dare to speak. She just shrank her body in fear. This girl noticed Zhong Luoyue's footstep. She suddenly grabbed Zhong Luoyue's clothes and whispered in fear, Where are you going? You know the way, don't you?" "I just don't want to sit still and wait for death and self-destruction," Zhong Luoyue said calmly. Just as she had said, fear had taken over their reason. Obviously, they were not completely out of danger yet, but these people had miraculously fallen into a manic mood. At this moment, they were actually beating each other up. Why don't you take me with you?" The girl suddenly begged. I just followed the boss here. I don't want to die here." Zhong Luoyue glanced at the girl's clothes. They weren't revealing at all. Instead, they were very decent. Furthermore, she was able to notice her actions. Obviously, she was a relatively calm and observant person. After all, it was still a little dangerous for him to advance alone. He should be able to get some help from this person. Even if he couldn't, he could at least look out for him. Thus, Zhong Luoyue nodded slightly, and then made a silent gesture. While everyone was trembling, the two of them cautiously retreated. The girl should be a local, but they could communicate in English. After forming a temporary team, Zhong Luoyue naturally found out the name of the other party, Natasha. "You're really a brave person." Walking in the dark passage, they could only rely on the light of the mobile phone to explore. The terrifying environment made Natasha grab the corner of Zhong Luoyue's clothes in fear. "I just have to be brave." Zhong Luoyue shook her head. "Don't grab me. Go on your own." Natasha hesitated for a moment before letting go of Zhong Luoyue's clothes. At this time, Zhong Luoyue began to look around the passage, especially the corner of the wall. "What are you doing?" "Looking for any clues." Zhong Luoyue calmly said, "Okay. Remember the big guy who broke the door?" Natasha nodded and then said, "That's amazing. Is he Superman?" Zhong Luoyue shook her head. "I don't know if he is Superman or not. But I know that he has companions. They should be in the same group. Since the big guy left first, he might have left a mark to inform his companions of his location." Natasha said in surprise, "Since the big guy is so powerful, does that mean as long as we find the mark he left behind, we will be able to get out safely?" Zhong Luoyue glanced at Natasha and said, "First, this is just my guess. He might not have left any mark. Second, even if there is a mark, there is no guarantee that the big guy will be able to find a safe place or a way out. This is just an experiment. Don't just stand there. Go to the side and check it out. Additionally, it would be best to take off your high heels. That way, it will be easier for you to move around." Feeling helpless, Natasha could only pick up the mobile phone. Following Zhong Luoyue's example, she began searching for any possible mark. She reached out with her hand to touch the wall. Then, the light from the mobile phone slowly swept across the wall. Suddenly, Natasha's phone caught the light of a pale face. At this time, the face opened its eyes. One of the eyes even had no eyeballs. At the same time, the face opened its mouth and spewed out a foul smell. Natasha was so scared that she fell to the ground. She screamed and quickly moved her body, bumping into the wall on the other side of the passage. The mobile phone that had fallen to the ground was now illuminated by the light from the ceiling. A figure walked into the light source. "Zombie, zombie! Zombie!" There was a bite wound on its neck, and its abdomen was rotten with intestines hanging out. At this moment, the zombie was walking towards Natasha. Natasha was so scared that she started to tremble. Between her legs, there was a liquid that smelled like urine. Seeing this, Zhong Luoyue gasped. She shuddered and moved forward a few steps. Then, she threw a side kick on the zombie's head, knocking it back and making it fall to the ground. "Let's go." Zhong Luoyue quickly reached out and pulled Natasha to her feet. He said a few words quickly, and then pulled her along and dashed out. Sir was so scary. A vampire like Lady Eve, followed by a zombie from Resident Evil. Zhong Luoyue felt that she had wasted all her self-cultivation in this place. However, what was waiting for her in front was a large wave of zombies, and Songda, who was surrounded by zombies. Songda, who had practiced thwart kung fu, at this time, waved his palms and made a whistling sound. Under the attack of this horrible palm, the zombie's head was directly smashed. At the same time, a lot of guests also fell down in the passageway. They were the first batch to follow Songda out, and had been following Songda closely. However, at this time, Songda had no time to pay attention to these guys. Or rather, he didn't intend to pay attention to them. They were caught by the zombies and were crazily bitten. "Help, help me," a man was twitching all over. His neck was bitten by a zombie, and a lot of blood was splashing in. Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt cold all over. At this time, Songda used the power of his palms to forcibly open a bloody path in the zombie crowd. Zhong Luoyue saw that the distance between Songda and herself was getting farther and farther, and suddenly became anxious. Her heart skipped a beat, and she shouted at Songda's back, "Hero, please wait." Songda could hear. He heard the voice from behind the zombie crowd, and it was Mandarin. Out of instinct, Songda turned back to take a look. "Hero, please take me with you, I know you're miss." Zhong Luoyue didn't care about the bad relationship between her and Song Ying at this time. She just took a gamble. As for what would happen after, she would only think about it if she could survive. "Song Ying. I know her. I'm her senior from the place where she used to go to school," Zhong Luoyue quickly added. Songda frowned at this time. He, Song Air and Song San hid in the dark most of the time, and were responsible for the safety of Song Tianyu. To put it bluntly, they were actually the diners of the Song family. These three brothers didn't participate in the business of the Song family, so they didn't know too much about the Zhong family. They also didn't really see the people of the Zhong family. "Do you really know our miss?" Songda frowned. "I swear, Song Ying and I are indeed classmates," Zhong Luoyue said with a serious face at this time. "Good." Songda nodded, and then raised his palms to kill the zombies. He didn't have the ability to protect everyone, but if it was only one or two people, it was completely possible. Although these zombies were scary, they could still be killed with one slap. They were much easier to deal with compared to the two monsters at the wine tasting party. At this time, seeing that Songda was willing to come to her rescue, Zhong Luoyue was instantly overjoyed. "Hero, thank you, I will definitely repay you for saving my life," Zhong Luoyue seriously promised at this time. She saw that Songda's skills were frightening, and he was like a real martial arts master who was known by word of mouth but hard to meet, so she directly treated him with the ancient etiquette, thinking that it was more appropriate. Songda didn't say much, and just nodded casually, but he always felt that this woman seemed to be able to guess what he was thinking. This woman was not simple. In the midst of so many zombies, she was able to keep calm and size up the situation. "Follow me." Songda's palm chopped down the last zombie, and then took the lead to walk in front. But he was sweating, obviously killing the zombies here really consumed a lot of physical strength. Zhong Luoyue saw that Songda walked in front, and then occasionally used his palm to touch the wall, leaving a strange mark, so she secretly noted it down. "Your physical strength is good, and you are calm enough, the lines of your muscles look good." Songda suddenly turned back at this time, indifferently said, "Have you practiced before?" Zhong Luoyue nodded and said, "The elders in my family asked, when I was a child. I stayed in the army for a period of time." Songda nodded, but suddenly stopped. He suddenly crouched on the ground, his ear close to the ground, and then quickly stood up, frowned and said, "There are a lot of footsteps in front, and it's very messy. It's those zombies just now." "What?" Zhong Luoyue hurriedly shocked. "That kind of thing, there are still more?" Songda solemnly said, "I'm afraid there are still many hidden here." In this place, there are blood-sucking monsters, there are zombies, it's just like a devil's den. Maybe even I. Zhong Luoyue heard this, her mood was not good. Song Tiaoyao said, Miss, if I can't handle it later, you can take your friend and leave when you have the chance. Whether you can go far or not, it depends on your fate. Now, go this way. Song De pointed to another road. Zhong Luoyue could only nod at this time with a complicated mood. She wanted to ask for help outside, but in this place, the mobile phone signal was all gone. If she couldn't find a way out, she was completely trapped in a cage full of zombies and vampires. Natasha couldn't understand the conversation between Zhong Luoyue and Song De. At this time, the two seemed to have reached some kind of consensus, and also looked at her intentionally or unintentionally, which made her feel very uneasy. The three didn't speak, and went on another road, each with their own thoughts. Walking in the relatively quiet passage, Luochio heard some messy sounds. Of course, without Hydasil leading the way, it didn't mean that Luochio couldn't find the place. Whether it was the guidance of the unseen, or a kind of perception that he couldn't explain, Luochio could always go to some places where things would happen. After such a long time, Luochio had long been used to it, so he simply let his feelings go. In short, he did this and that. At this time, a door in front opened. Luochio walked to the door, and found that it was full of many corpses. Some of these corpses were rotten, but some were still able to move. They were zombies. Luochio saw real zombies for the first time. There should be a large wave of zombies here, but they were killed, so there were so many corpses on the ground. At this time, in the corner of the room, those zombies with only half of the body, or only the head, were piled together, and seemed to be eating something. Luochio frowned slightly as he walked to this place. These zombies had no intelligence, and didn't know how to be afraid, only a simple conditioned reflex. The previous giant spider had a little intelligence, so it knew to avoid. Luochio waved his hand, and the large group of zombies was pulled by something, and scattered in an instant. At the same time, Luochio saw an old man. His legs were almost left with white bones, and his flesh was almost gnawed away. His left arm had disappeared, and only the shoulder was left. His waist had also been bitten open. The old man's face was completely gray. His body was sitting against the wall, but at this time he could slightly raise his head. The old man saw Luochio, and his lips moved slightly. Luochio squatted down, grabbed the old man's hand that was tightly covering his chest, and whispered, "Do you have anything to say?" "You are." The old man's lips moved again. He felt a strange power flowing into his body, and his almost disappearing life seemed to be intercepted. He looked at Luochio and seemed to think of something. "You are the person Takizawa mentioned?" "Takizawa?" Luochio was startled, and then nodded. "It should be me. Your body. Have you used anything that overdraws your life force?" The old man, Amand, coughed out a mouthful of blood. I know my situation, don't waste your energy." "It's okay." Luochio shook his head. "Although I can't save you now, this consumption is nothing. I have been bitten by zombies. It won't be long before I become like them." Amand quickly said, "I only ask you to kill me, let me die as a human. Also, I have the inheritance key of the 12 round table paladins. I can give it to you." At this moment, Amand slowly unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a badge on his body. Yin. Chapter 884. Luochio picked up the token from Amand's hand and looked at it. The diamond-shaped token had a three-dimensional feel. At the same time, there was a strange coat of arms engraved on it. There was a weak, but at the same time, there was a special flow of energy that made people feel neutral and peaceful. "Why are you giving it to me?" Luochio put down the so-called inheritance key and looked at Amand's eyes that were bloodshot because of pain. There was no transaction. Luochio knew this. This was the first time Luochio came into contact with a transaction as a non-boss. Amand said weakly, "Other than you. I can't wait for anyone else." Maybe you're a good person, maybe you're a bad person. But to me you are the only one. I can only entrust this to you. My final wish. I won't let you work for nothing. This key can bring me a chance to inherit the ancient holy knights of the Round Table. Luaccio looked at the inheritance key again. Amonst was breathing hard at this time. Since I left, my seat has been empty. After so many years, I still haven't completed the trial, but this key can bring an unofficial entry. If you are lucky and strong enough, you can also get its power, so this was actually a pass to go through the back door. If there was a strict organization behind the 12 Round Table Paladins, and all the paladins who inherited the title of the 12 Round Table Paladins were strictly controlled, this thing could bypass the control and bring the holder into the secret realm behind the key to obtain the qualifications of the inheritor. Luaccio shook his head. Old man, to be honest, this opportunity is not useful to me. But I can try to help you. What do you want me to do? Just to kill you now? Amand looked into Luaccio's eyes and slowly said, Young life, our meeting is a kind of fate. The clarity in your eyes reminds me of the gaze of the goddess of justice. Perhaps you will not become a knight. But you will definitely be a gentleman. From you, I feel the noble quality of humility and courtesy. You are a person who keeps his promises, Luaccio said indifferently. Elder, it's not good to flatter people. What do you want me to do? You haven't made it clear. But Amonst said, I didn't see wrongly. I hope you can find my granddaughter, Elizabeth. She is a hybrid between a vampire and a human. She is in great pain. If she is unable to overcome this pain, please help her as a human to welcome death. Luaccio was silent for a moment. Under Amand's expectant and uneasy gaze, he said, In my opinion, no matter what kind of life form it is proof that it is alive. You're only clinging to a fixed identity, even going as far as to choose death. Why did you make such a choice? Amand suddenly opened his mouth, but no words came out. Luaccio said again, You made the choice on behalf of your granddaughter? Amand's breathing suddenly became rapid. Luaccio finally said, What is her own choice? Amand's eyes dimmed, and the hand holding the inheritance key gradually loosened, as if he had used up all his strength. Amand's vision blurred, and he seemed to be hallucinating. He heard a call, he heard Elizabeth's voice. He heard her calling out, Grandpa. Amand suddenly grabbed Luaccio's hand tightly. Even when his body was being devoured by the zombies, under the endless biting and tearing, he still managed to endure it. At this moment, his eyes were blurred by tears. Please, let her live, I want her to live, I only want her to live. Amand grabbed Luoccio's palm and suddenly exerted force to make the body that was full of holes sit up. His eyes were opened very lightly, and the light in his eyes showed that the candle was lit up at the last moment. Let her live, come down, he roared. Luaccio did not blink. His lips were slightly opened, but he did not speak for a long time. He looked at Amand. The old man's body seemed to have stiffened, and he did not move. He even held his breath. This is, Luaccio said softly, this is your choice. Amand still did not move. His hand was like an iron clamp, tightly grabbing Luaccio's hand, but Luaccio knew that at this moment, the old man's life had come to an end. Luaccio used his hand to pry open Amand's fingers, and then laid his body down. He looked at Amand's eyes that were wide open, and his mouth that was not closed after the roar. He took the inheritance key necklace from his body. In the palm of his hand, the necklace twirled around his palm twice. Luaccio clenched his hand, then looked at Amand and said softly, I'll take it. After that, Luaccio used his palm to brush Amand's eyes, allowing him to close his eyes. Luaccio's palm was still pressed in front of Amand's eyes, and he did not let go. There was no such thing as a gentle push from the palm, but Amand's body shattered in an instant. Like a broken mirror, The fragments flew away from Luocchio's body, turning into little spots of light, and wrapped around Luocchio's body. The room lit up, as if a galaxy and nebula were born. In the center, a ray of light slowly rose. It was all that was Amundsen, his thought, his will, his will, his will, his sole imprint on earth, his soul. Luocchio grabbed the soul in his hand, and at the same time, opened his left hand, and a box appeared. He put Amundsen's soul into the box. It was not a transaction item, so it did not need to be stored, and it did not need anything. It only needed to stay quietly in the box, and it would not dissipate. The box was transparent in the middle, and it constantly emitted a star-like luster, which was fascinating. Luocchio slowly exhaled and stood up with the box. The light gradually dissipated, and the room returned to normal. At this time, the zombies whose bodies were destroyed, but not dead, crawled towards Luocchio on the ground, and made meaningless sounds. Rest in peace. The zombies in the room were all smashed into pieces, leaving no flesh and blood. Luocchio suddenly glanced at the corner of the wall above the room, then slowly walked out of this place. The screen embedded in the wall clearly reflected the eyes that were looking at him. He found us? This was the innermost laboratory, the pure white room. Uncle Kim looked at Tushini in surprise, and even a little frightened. He looked uneasily at him. There was no doubt that they saw the whole process from Lisabeth's rage to Amundsen's final dissipation. They could see most of the things in the maze through the surveillance cameras installed in all the major places. Tushini looked at another screen as if nothing had happened, and said indifferently, "If it were you, wouldn't you think of something when you saw the surveillance camera?" "I'm just..." Uncle Jean frowned and shook his head. Then, he hesitated and said, "I'm just scared by this gaze. I don't know how to describe it. It's just a strange feeling of coldness." Tushini said indifferently, "He is not looking at you, just do your own thing, why can't you find him?" Uncle Kim calmed down and asked, "You mean Hidesil?" Tushini said, "Among these guys the easiest to deal with is Takizawa, who seems to be the most cunning. The most difficult to deal with is Hidesil. He is a dark merchant and has many unclear relationships with the Magician Association. His ancestor was once the owner of this place. There are too many uncertainties." As he said that, the alarm in the room suddenly sounded. Uncle Kim was shocked. He quickly picked up the remote control on the table, aimed it at one of the screens on the wall, and pressed the button. What appeared on the screen was none other than Hidesil. Right now, he was standing in front of a huge steel door. In his hand, he was holding a whip made of red light. At this moment, he was waving the red light whip, continuously lashing at the steel door that was blocking him. Every time he lashed, a dent would appear on the steel door, and the crack in the door would widen. It would not take long for the steel door to be broken by Hidesil. How did he get here? Uncle Kim was shocked and angry at this time, because he was only an ordinary person after all. Facing an inhuman power, he was not as fragile as an ant to him. "You stay here. I'll go and meet him." Tushini stood up at this time and pressed the button next to the table at the same time. The mechanism on the table suddenly opened. The daylily series on the table quickly sank into the table. This table was not so much a table as a platform. Tushini walked out of the room quickly. After the door closed, Uncle Kim suddenly breathed heavily. He walked to the edge of the platform and groped around. Uncle Kim tried for a while, but still could not open the mechanism of the platform. Uncle Kim frowned, then suddenly walked to the door, put his ear on the door, and listened quietly for a while. At this time, Uncle Kim quickly took out a small bottle from his arms. He opened the bottle and smeared the contents on his finger. It was a blood-red liquid. It was blood. Uncle Kim used his finger smeared with the blood in the bottle to touch the mechanism on the platform again. With a click, the mechanism was obviously triggered. Uncle Jin's face lit up with joy as he looked at the containers containing different daylily series that were slowly coming towards him. His breathing gradually became faster. "I won't just believe your words," Uncle Kim muttered to himself. I believe in myself more. Bang! A zombie flew out because it could not bear Song Da's King Kong palm. But at the same time, more zombies rushed toward Songda, as if they could not kill them all. Songda, Zhong Luoyue, and Natasha, who formed a temporary team, did manage to avoid a wave of zombies, but soon they unfortunately ran into a new wave. These zombies seemed to be able to emerge from everywhere, and the number was increasing. Even some zombies were obviously rotten to the point that they did not look like humans, but they still moved quickly. Where did these things come from? Natasha was so frightened that she directly grabbed Zhong Luoyue's arm. Zhong Luoyue could not help but let out a painful groan. Natasha was shocked and quickly let go of her hands. I'm sorry, did I hurt you? Zhong Luoyue shook her head. It's not your fault, I hurt myself before. The position that Natasha was grabbing was right below the shoulder that Madame Eve had scratched when she was fighting with Madame Eve. But at this time, Natasha saw that Zhong Luoyue's face was pale and cold sweat appeared on her forehead. She seemed to be in great pain. She could not help but feel guilty and quickly asked. Zhong Luoyue made a gesture of silence. At this time, they were under the protection of Songda. Although no zombies could approach them, Songda had some restrictions. Zhong Luoyue said directly, "Don't make any noise, don't distract him, it's very dangerous. If something happens to him, we will only be in more danger. So, we must not become a burden." Natasha quickly nodded and then forcefully covered her mouth. Zhong Luoyue at this time gently scratched her shoulder and suddenly gasped in pain. But she clenched her teeth and forcibly held back the sound of pain. There were countless zombies in this underground maze. It was not a good idea to continue like this. Song Da's strength would be exhausted sooner or later. At that time, not to mention whether he had the ability to protect himself, whether he would stay or not would be a test of his humanity. Zhong Luoyue was secretly anxious. Looking at the zombies that kept coming out, she suddenly had a strange idea. At first, although the clothes of the zombies were tattered, but after all, it was still possible to see that they were modern products. But this time, the zombies that came out were wearing some old leather armor, and the degree of decomposition of their bodies was more serious. This wave of zombies, were they ancient people? While he was thinking, Songda suddenly roared. He jumped up and slapped the zombie's head. Immediately, the zombie's head was smashed into pieces. Songda sighed, turned around and said, "Let's go." This wave of zombies all died under Song Da's palm. At the same time, his body was sweating more, and his whole face was directly soaked. Seeing this, Natasha hurriedly grabbed a pack of tissues from her body, walked in front of Songda, and wiped the sweat on his face. The passage was stuffy and hot, not to mention Songda. In fact, Zhong Luoyue and Natasha were already sweating. Natasha was wearing cool clothes, but at this time, she was sweating, and her clothes were sticking to her skin. Out of gratitude, she carefully wiped the sweat for Songda, and her body was almost attached to Songda's body. What's worse is that Songda seemed to find that this woman didn't seem to be wearing underwear. At this time, the two protruding points of her chest, intentionally or unintentionally rubbed against his body. Songda was scared and quickly recited the Diamond Sutra in his heart. And Natasha seemed to be aware of the embarrassing part, but if she stopped now, it would seem more embarrassing, so she sped up the movement of her hands, and the wiping action also became faster. Zhong Luoyue saw the reaction of these two people, but didn't have too many thoughts, and didn't intend to say anything. She just took the opportunity to recover her physical strength. However, at this time, Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt a tingling sensation on her neck. In the darkness behind her, at this moment, a face suddenly appeared. It's Lady Eve. At this time, Lady Eve's pair of fangs had completely pierced Zhong Luoyue's neck. "Finally found you, my beautiful child." Zhong Luoyue's mouth opened. She only felt that at this moment, her body not only didn't feel pain, but there was a strange kind of pleasure, making her whole body become sensitive. She couldn't help but let out a sorrowful but excited moan. Chapter 885. Plop. Zhong Luoyue quickly knelt on the ground and then fell down. The sound she made attracted Song De and Natasha's attention. They both looked at Zhong Luoyue and saw that she had fallen to the ground. Beside her, Lady Eve was gracefully wiping her lips. Her appearance had been restored, and she was beautiful beyond compare. Seeing this, Song De couldn't help but be furious. He widened his eyes and said angrily, "Demon, what did you do to her?" He spoke in proper Chinese, and his voice was as loud as a large bell. He used his inner force to activate it, and it was deafening. It was a little bit like the lion's roar technique. Lady Eve was shocked by this roar, and felt her scalp tingle. Still, she had supernatural powers after all, and quickly suppressed the discomfort and smiled. "Although I don't understand what you're saying, you seem quite angry. Just treat it as dessert after the meal. The blood of an angry man is very sweet." Song De also didn't understand what Lady Eve was saying. He just felt very angry. Even though this fellow had a very good figure, as if water was about to drip out of it, she was a monster. Although she looked beautiful, she was a demon. Although she looked like she wanted to seduce men, she was a demon. If possible, Song De wanted to slap this woman to death, even if she looked really beautiful. Therefore, Song De was very loyal to his body. He suddenly gathered all his strength and blasted the clothes on his chest, revealing his strong muscles. The muscles all over his body were like bronze. "Demon, take my mighty King Kong palm." Song De jumped out, and his palm fiercely slapped toward Lady Eve. The speed was too fast. For Natasha, all she could see at this moment was Song De jumping out and slapping down. Then, there was a loud bang. Because of Song Da's slap, the floor of this passageway, which was neither too big nor too small, instantly cracked and dust billowed out. In Natasha's eyes, Song De was no different from a superhuman being to be able to do something like this. However, Song De quickly retreated from the smoke and dust. He looked at his surroundings solemnly. At the same time, he extended his hand to protect Natasha and began to carefully retreat. Zhong Luoyue had already fallen to the ground, and it was unknown whether she was dead or alive. Song De had no other choice at this time. However, Lady Eve's giggles kept echoing in this tunnel. It was as if she was everywhere. Song Da's serious expression couldn't help but become even more serious. "Your strength is really strong. If you hit me, even I won't feel good. However, no matter how strong your strength is, if you can't hit me, what can you do?" "I don't even know what you're talking about." "Grenade-throwing tower." Song De raised his palm again. But just as Lady Eve had said, Song Da's slap had tremendous destructive power. When it hit the wall, it instantly sent debris flying, but it couldn't hit Lady Eve. She was like a ball of purple mist as she moved upstream in the passage, dodging Song Da's slap again and again. In less than 2 minutes, Song Da was already panting like an ox, and had to stop and adjust his breathing. At this moment, Song Da had no choice but to give Natasha a meaningful look. Startled, Natasha subconsciously pointed at herself, but Song Da nodded vigorously and then quickly waved his hand. Only then did Natasha come back to her senses. Remembering what Zhong Luoyue had said before she collapsed, she braced herself and turned to flee towards the other end of the passage. "Do you think you can let this little girl escape? After I'm done with you, I'll take care of her slowly." Lady Eve's entire body floated up. Unexpectedly, Song Da took a deep breath at this moment. His palms shone faintly as he directly struck at both sides of the passage. The strength of these two palms was extraordinarily terrifying. When they hit the wall, it instantly shattered and cracks spread out in all directions. Lady Eve sneered. "What, have you lost your mind? You still can't hit me, so you want to vent your anger? Strong man, I can help you vent your energy." Lady Eve bent down with her hands on her waist, her large breasts looking like they were going to jump out of her collar, but her expression suddenly changed slightly. Because at this moment, Song-de suddenly stomped on the ground with great force. In an instant, both the front and back of the passage were directly shattered. Huge rocks fell down, completely blocking the front and back in the blink of an eye, leaving only 7 or 8 meters of space for Song-de and Lady Eve to move around. At this moment, Song-de slowly exhaled, then got into a horse stance and snorted coldly. "Humph. Which, let's see how you're going to hide this time. Grenade throwing tower. Take my mighty King Kong palm." "You!" Lady Eve was instantly shocked and angry. She quickly retreated, but bumped into a block of bricks and couldn't retreat any further. She gritted her teeth and had no choice but to use both hands to protect her front and take Song-da's slap head-on. The powerful force broke both of Madame Eve's arms in an instant. Lady Eve screamed and had no choice but to slide down from Song-da's crotch. When she stood up again, her arms were already hanging down unnaturally. Even a vampire's powerful self-healing ability couldn't heal her arms. At this moment, Song-de directly reached out to grab the remnants of his clothes, then spat and got into a horse stance. His left palm stretched out in front of him to face Lady Eve, while his right palm was at his waist. He leaned to one side, but looked straight ahead as he said loudly, "Shaolin outcast Song Qingshu. Your Excellency, please enlighten me. Grenade-throwing tower." "Ah!" Loud sounds rang out in this narrow space. This was a battle between a particularly strong man and a particularly coquettish seductress, with no audience. Zhong Luoyue suddenly woke up with a start, as if she'd had a nightmare. She was so frightened that her whole body went cold and she sat up at once. She abruptly recalled the scene of Lady Eve appearing behind her, and instantly reached out to touch her neck. But after touching it several times, she didn't feel anything like a wound. Zhong Luoyue couldn't help but frown doubtfully as she looked around. She realized that the passage in front of her had been blocked at some point by bricks that had fallen from above. She didn't know what had happened after she fainted, but it was obvious that she was the only one left. Song-de and Natasha were gone, and Lady Eve wasn't here either. Apart from herself, there were only the zombie corpses on the ground. Zhong Luoyue reached out to touch the stone-piled wall a few times, but didn't find any loose spots at all, so she could only give up on this path. The path ahead was different, so she could only go back where she had come from. Fortunately, she had memorized the marks that Song-de had left behind. That way, she might be able to run into Song-er and Song-san, if they hadn't been killed by that terrifying monster that looked like a giant leech. After making up her mind, Zhong Luoyue didn't linger any longer. However, she had only taken 2 steps when she suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. She shook her head hard and barely managed to get rid of the dizziness. "My shoulder, when did it stop hurting?" Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt that when she moved her shoulder, which should have been injured, she didn't feel the slightest bit of pain. She moved around a bit more and found that her arm didn't hurt at all. It was as if it hadn't been injured at all. She kept thinking in her heart, and soon returned to the place where she had met Song-de. The place was still full of zombie corpses. Zhong Luoyue shook her head. From here, it seemed to be the way back to the party. She could still remember the approximate way to go, but to go back to that dangerous place? She was more inclined to find a place to hide. She didn't know how long she could hide, but it would be less dangerous than encountering danger. In a trance, Zhong Luoyue couldn't help but remember the things that happened when she was a child. When she was young, she followed her big brother and second brother Zhong Luochen to the army to gain experience. But with the temperament of a teenager, the 3 of them sneaked out to play again when the instructor wasn't paying attention. That was the army that was stationed in the deep mountains and forests. Outside the camp was the complex mountain forest. Not long after, Zhong Luoyue lost her way because she couldn't keep up with her big brother and second brother's pace. She hid in a tree hole alone and cried for a long time in fear. Finally, after a whole night until dawn, she was found by the people sent by the army. From that time on, Zhong Luoyue never turned off the light to sleep. Why do I still think of that thing? Zhong Luoyue rubbed her eyebrows, Am I still not strong enough? She looked at the phone's battery that was gradually running out, and knew that the light source couldn't support it for much longer. She couldn't help but feel anxious, but at this time, she heard some strange movements. It was the sound of walking. Zhong Luoyue was startled. Is it a new wave of zombies? She quickly reached into her pocket, and took out a small ceramic gun that had been modified into the length of lipstick, and held it tightly in her hand. She didn't bring much of this thing, only 2 of them. One of them was already used on Lady Eve, but it didn't work. This was her last life-saving means. Zhong Luoyue bitterly smiled, and let her body close to the wall. She hid in the corner of the passage, and held her breath. The sound of footsteps came from afar. Soon. When that thing came out, a black shadow flashed by her side. Zhong Luoyue quickly pushed the lipstick ceramic gun in her hand, and aimed at the back of the black shadow. The other side suddenly stopped, and slowly turned around. Zhong Luoyue's breathing was slightly faster, but her heartbeat was unexpectedly calm. It seemed that the blood flow was somewhat not smooth, but she didn't have time to distinguish these changes in her body. Do you hate me? The sound of talking. Zhong Luoyue was startled, and hurriedly turned on the light of the mobile phone, and reflected on the black shadow to see the appearance of the other side. Clean as a person who just came out of the fitting room. Zhong Luoyue couldn't even find a bit of dirt on the other side's face. The other side's hair was even more neat and not messy, and didn't look like a refugee at all. It's you. Zhong Luoyue slowly put down the lipstick ceramic gun, and at the same time felt relieved. You are brought by Song Ying. My name is Luochio. Hello. It wasn't a zombie, and it wasn't a horrible vampire like Lady Eve. Zhong Luoyue felt that it was really good to meet a person at this time. From the perspective of survival, it was more ideal to meet a man. But she didn't expect to meet Luochio in this situation, the mysterious young man brought by Song Ying. However, when they met again, she was already in a sorry state. Her clothes had already been torn in many places, and her hands, feet, and face were also stained. On the other hand, the other party seemed to be completely fine. Did he not encounter those zombies, or what? You don't look well? Luochio looked at Zhong Luoyue at this time. Zhong Luoyue tiredly leaned against the wall, and stretched out her hand to wipe her face, and said with a wry smile, Anyone who encountered zombies wouldn't be in a good place, right? Are you okay? Luochio shook his head and said, I don't mean this. Zhong Luoyue was surprised. Then what else? You'd better feel it yourself. Luochio shook his head again, and then thought for a while, and then took off his coat. He didn't put it on Zhong Luoyue, but just stretched out the coat and said indifferently, It's cold on the ground, you'd better put it on. Only then did Zhong Luoyue have the time to take a look at himself. The word terrible wasn't enough to describe it. Although it couldn't be described as a spring shower, but the image was really bad. Many places on her chest had exposed the color of her underwear. But Zhong Luoyue was not a delicate person, and could even be said to be a strong person. She very naturally said thank you, and then directly took the coat from Luochio's hand, and then put it on her body. Of course, the size was not suitable, but it was so warm. You don't seem to be afraid at all? Zhong Luoyue frowned. The calmness of this young man called Luochio was really unreasonable. Even a martial arts master like Song Do was always nervous and vigilant. What's more, this guy looked like a weak scholar. It's okay, I haven't encountered anything dangerous for the time being. Luochio looked around and said casually, It's very quiet. Zhong Luoyue looked around with doubt. Indeed, at this time the surrounding was really quiet, and she seemed to be really unable to hear the movement of those zombies. It seems that you are very lucky. Zhong Luoyue nodded, but didn't completely believe what he said, but asked again, Where are you going? Do you know the way out? But just asked, Zhong Luoyue felt that this question was more or less idiotic. If he knew the way out, he would have already left. How could he still be near the wine-tasting venue? I'm going to find someone. Luochio looked at the road ahead. It should be in front. Song Ying? You got separated? Zhong Luoyue gave a start. At this time, Luoqiu looked at Zhong Luoyue, and when he was about to speak, the power of Zhong Luoyue's phone finally ran out, and the surroundings suddenly became dark. Luoqiu didn't have any problem with darkness, but Zhong Luoyue's reaction was somewhat unexpected. This strong-looking woman suddenly hugged her own body, and her breathing suddenly became rapid, as if she was very scared. But this situation didn't last for long. Luoqiu took out the phone and then turned on the light source. The light of the phone directly shone on the ground. He looked at Zhong Luoyue and said, "Do you have claustrophobia?" This was really a terrible day, no matter if it was the various dangers, or the most vulnerable side of her was seen. Zhong Luoyue lowered her head and didn't speak at this time. Yin. Chapter 886. People are not perfect. There are always flaws, so they can appear alive, can be touched, can make you feel that the other person is not far away, can have a sigh of, so she can also be like this. But if Zhong Luoyue's situation is put into the vampire model, then it is interesting. This Miss Zhong may not be very clear about her changes. After all, this is a gradual process of change, but she will slowly know. But Luoqiu knows that the change of life form cannot escape his eyes that are always observing the black and white world. A quasi-vampire who is destined to not be able to live under the sun, but is uneasy about the night. Luoqiu doesn't know why he smiled at this time, probably because he felt that this situation is really interesting. But Zhong Luoyue doesn't think so. She thinks that this may be a kind of mockery. Does everyone have a weak side that they don't want to let others know, and once it is known, they will be embarrassed into anger? Zhong Luoyue won't be sure, because there may be people who don't care even if their weaknesses are exposed, but obviously, she is not one of them. Of course, she won't be embarrassed into anger, because she clearly understands when it is okay to be angry, and when it is not. Such as the current situation, meaningless arguments will only waste the time to escape. I'm much better, thank you. Not arguing, but really not happy. Zhong Luoyue's face is a little better now, but also a little colder. Luoqiu nodded, then thought for a while, took out a power bank and a power cord and gave them to Zhong Luoyue. Zhong Luoyue doesn't know where Luoqiu took these things out from, probably from his pants? Take it. After giving the things out, Luoqiu said, "I'm going to the front." Like a traveler, after passing by a small tribe, leaving some things, and then leaving. Zhong Luoyue has a feeling that he will go far, very far. This guy doesn't intend to team up with me? When Luoqiu turned around and walked a few steps away, Zhong Luoyue realized that he really had no intention of forming a team. Wait a moment. She had no choice but to call out to him. As far as he could remember, Zhong Luoyue had only taken the initiative to ask a man to stay, and it was almost always concentrated on a few men in her immediate family. This was the first time for an outsider. Is there anything else? Luoqiu turned around. Oh, the power bank is fully charged, don't worry. Not this. Zhong Luoyue instantly shook her head. Why was this guy worried about such trivial things? This guy's radio waves are so strange. Follow me, Luoqiu suddenly said. Zhong Luoyue felt that her ears were a little hot. She did have such an idea, but she didn't know how to say it. She was used to negotiating with people, stating all kinds of interests, and then reaching a consensus with the other party, but she had never been in such a situation before. His thoughts were exposed by a single sentence. She nodded and then silently followed. At the same time, she realized one thing. This young man called Luoqiu was probably a very difficult person to get along with. She couldn't help but think of Song Ying. With that girl's character, she probably had suffered a lot from Luoqiu. How did you get separated from Song Ying? Zhong Luoyue broke the silence, and only the sound of footsteps could be heard. They didn't come down, Luoqiu said casually. They are still outside. For now, they are safe. You don't have to worry. Zhong Luoyue suddenly sneered. Song Ying, this woman, sent people to block me at the airport. If I didn't arrange it in advance, I'm afraid I would be lying in the hospital now. Why should I worry about her? Luochu said, Would you rather lie in the hospital or come here? Of course. Zhong Luoyue was startled. She suddenly felt that if she had just been sent to the hospital because of a car accident, it would be 1,000 times better than coming to this place. Song Ying couldn't really take her life. That would only lead to the crazy revenge of the Zhong family. She could only let her suffer a little. This was almost the rule of the battle between the aristocratic families. If it wasn't a desperate situation, no one would fight to the death. However, Zhong Luoyue wasn't willing to let Luoqiu lead the conversation so easily. She said coldly, So, she already knew what happened here? Should I be grateful to her? Her? Actually, she is quite muddle-headed. Luoqiu shook his head. I don't mean to ask you to be grateful to her. In fact, if nothing happened here, there wouldn't be such a situation for you. What seems to be a bad thing turned out to be a good thing. I can only say that it is a strange fate. Strange to describe fate. Zhong Luoyue was stunned and said strangely, You are the first. Wait, you just said that Song Ying isn't here? She seemed to be relieved subconsciously. Then, she realized that there was something wrong with this idea. However, after thinking about it carefully, she felt relieved. If Song Ying wasn't here and was outside, when she sensed that something was wrong, she might be able to bring people from outside to rescue them. This might not be a bad thing. She is a little uncomfortable and fell asleep on top. Luoqiu said casually. Zhong Luoyue opened her mouth. She felt a little strange. In just a few minutes, this guy had made her mood fluctuate several times. She really wanted to be angry. Then who are you looking for? Zhong Luoyue calmed down. She thought that her cultivation of the mind shouldn't be broken so easily. An older child. Luoqiu said softly, Someone asked me to take care of her. When Luoqiu said this, his eyes suddenly turned and looked at the darkness in front of them. Zhong Luoyue was startled by his action. She quickly asked nervously, What did you find? Could it be a zombie? Luoqiu shook his head and made a gesture to keep quiet. Zhong Luoqiu quietly took out the lipstick ceramic gun hidden in his pocket and looked ahead attentively. He saw that a faint blue light was suddenly born in the darkness. It flashed and slowly flew over. Butterfly. To Zhong Luoyue's surprise, what flew out of the darkness in front of them was a beautiful butterfly flashing with blue light. Why would a butterfly appear in this place? This butterfly quickly flew in front of Luoqiu and finally stopped on Luoqiu's index finger and folded its wings. This was the flash butterfly goddess that followed Luoqiu down from the ground. After the butterfly stopped, it suddenly flew up and circled around Luoqiu several times. To be honest, in this dark environment, this blue butterfly flying was really beautiful. Luoqiu said, Where do you want to take me? The butterfly suddenly flew away and flew forward. Luoqiu didn't think much and directly followed it. Manor, inside the castle. Several men in black clothes were walking quickly in the corridor. They were the people in the castle. Of course, they weren't servants, but people with a certain level of strength. They quickly stopped in front of a door in the corridor. One of the men reached out to twist the door lock, but it didn't open. Another one took out a key and inserted it, but it still didn't open. Let me do it. The third man shook his head and took out a pistol, shooting at the door lock without saying a word. There was no doubt that the bullet would directly break the door lock. They all thought so. However, an incredible thing happened. When the bullet hit the door lock, only a loud sound was heard. After that, the bullet missed its mark and hit the floor. The men glanced at it and were all stunned. The man who fired the gun didn't believe it. He fired a few more shots at the door lock. He even fired a shot at the door panel. However, all the bullets couldn't do any damage to the door. The bullets fell to the ground powerlessly. They looked as if they had seen a ghost. They naturally didn't open the door because they were bored, but because they received an order. According to the many surveillance cameras installed in the castle, the miss of the Song family should be in this room. because what the surveillance cameras saw was that after they went in, they didn't come out, only a young man came out. The men frowned and quickly opened the door of the next room, and then climbed out from the balcony of this room, intending to enter from the outside. But when they climbed to the balcony of this hidden room, in fact, they had already seen several women lying on the sofa, seemingly asleep, but they couldn't get in. It was obviously an open glass door, and there was nothing in front of them, but there was something invisible in between. They reached out and knocked in the air, and found that it was a layer of invisible, abnormally hard thing. The man who shot the gun didn't believe it and fired again, but this time, the bullet was fixed in the air. The few of them widened their eyes. At this moment, the frozen bullet suddenly bounced back and brushed past one of their ears. He immediately covered his ears, which were already dripping with blood. They looked at this scene in horror and then picked up the phone in a panic, saying in horror, "Uncle Gene, something is wrong here. The door can't be broken," the bullet reflected. Uncle Gene listened to the phone, and suddenly stood up. He was still in Tushini's laboratory, but not in the pure white room. Uncle Gene frowned and then said, "I see, the injured people go for treatment, and the rest stay and watch. If there is any movement in the room, immediately report it." Uncle Gene hung up the phone, and then lowered his head, pacing back and forth, thinking. They were just ordinary people, and had never seen unnatural power. Without a doubt, this kind of supernatural power was hidden in that room. Uncle Gene had seen how the young man who came with Miss Song crushed the room full of zombies in an instant. What's the origin of this superhuman? Uncle Kim sat down again and muttered to himself, "Is he also a vampire like Madame Eve and the others? But why did he come to this place? Could it be?" Uncle Jin's expression suddenly changed, because he thought of a possibility. He knew a lot about Project True Blood, and he was even more clear about the cause and effect of Project True Blood being almost discovered by the vampires of the 13 families. Could it be, he was actually sent by the 13 families? Thinking of this possibility, a drop of cold sweat appeared on Uncle Jin's forehead, and he quickly looked at the computer screen next to him. On the screen, Tushini had already started to make contact with Citasil. "There's no time." Uncle Gene clenched his teeth and resolutely took out a few test tubes. The liquid in these test tubes was exactly what he had poured out from each of the Daylily series. Uncle Gene quickly walked in front of an instrument and inserted the test tubes in his hand into the instrument. One by one, the straws quickly sucked out the liquid in these test tubes, and then began to transport it to the interior of the instrument. At the same time, Uncle Gene quickly set a series of complicated parameters on the instrument's control panel. This is the only chance, it must succeed. Uncle Jin's eyes were filled with madness. This was the gaze of a gambler who had staked everything on one throw when he made his last bet. After walking closer, one could see more clearly that the blood-red whip in Citasil's hand had dense spikes on it. However, it was not an energy body, but an entity emitting red light like a red vine. The steel door that was almost broken suddenly opened, but the moment it opened, Citasil did not stop. Instead, he quickly swung the blood-red whip in his hand and shot it inside the door. The one who appeared inside the door was Tushini. Facing Citasil's blood-red whip, Tushini did not dodge. When the whip was about to hit him, there was something outside his body that resisted the attack of the whip, bouncing it away. "Sorry, I couldn't stop in time." Citasil looked at Tushini with a seductive smile. Tushini stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said indifferently, "Citasil, you are not fiddling with your new pet. Instead, you are here to make trouble for me. I just came over to check on the progress of the production of True Blood." Citasil shrugged. "No matter what, I am the biggest investor of Project True Blood. Can't I check on the progress?" Tushini gave him a gentle glance. "The progress is not bad. No need to worry." Citasil sneered. "It seems there are a lot of little guys in the cellar. Are they here to liven things up?" "It is indeed to liven things up." Haidasir continued with a sneer. You've even released the zombie army that my ancestor hid in this place. This is quite a show to liven things up. These guys are so crazy that they will even attack us, don't you know? Aren't you doing well? Tushini calmly tidied up his sleeves and then dismissed him. If there is nothing else, go back. I have to continue the work at hand. Citasil stepped directly over the steel door and walked in. Tushini, there is still one thing I don't understand. Your strength has increased a lot. It stands to reason that Karen, who gave you the embrace, is only from the same generation as me. What makes you think you can do that? This time, Karen did not appear. She just sent me Sanshing and asked me to bring it over. So I was thinking. Citasil's eyes narrowed. Tushini, you didn't eat Karen, did you? Don't you know? Tushini asked coldly. Citasil was startled and frowned. What you said is quite interesting. Instead, you are asking me. What would I know? I'm the one who's angry right now. Chapter 887. Citasil was a 7th-generation vampire. In the Fernandez family, the one with the highest bloodline was the previous generation of Baron Fernandez, who was hanged to death. He was the 5th-generation vampire. The power of the previous generation was stronger than the power of the next generation. The previous generation who gave the embrace had a strong ability to dominate the next generation. This was almost the law in the vampire world. Karen was the same generation of vampires as Citasil, so Tushini was considered an 8th-generation vampire. Among vampires, different generations of vampires had different changes. For example, the transformed vampires like the Takizawa family. Strictly speaking, they should be blood-sucking monsters. Their algebra might be lower, but their power could not be calculated by algebra. In addition, vampires would give birth to their own special abilities. Different abilities would naturally have different effects in battle. Therefore, unless they were of a similar type, it was difficult to define the strength of vampires. Unless the vampires had evolved to the 3rd generation, which was the level of the patriarch of the 13 clans, also known as the prince. The 3rd-generation princes, no matter which clan they belonged to, whether they were transformed or from the wild, were powerful enough to suppress vampires below the 3rd generation. This was the ironclad rule of the vampire race. Among the lower generation vampires, there was also a situation where the descendants would eat the previous generation who gave the embrace to them and receive the blood of the previous generation. Then, they would break through the long accumulation of time and be promoted to a higher algebra. Karen and Citasil used to know each other, and they could be classified into similar factions. That was why Citasil could say that Tushini should not have the powerful power he had today. Although I don't know if you ate Karen or obtained the power temporarily through other means. Citasil shook his head, and his eyes were slightly cold. But as a junior, you should have the etiquette of a junior. Tushini, you are too unruly. With that, Citasil turned into a flash of light and appeared in front of Tushini. He wasn't afraid of Tushini's sudden increase in strength. Although the 7th generation of vampires didn't sound very advanced, in reality, most of the vampires walking in the world were from the 6th or 7th generation. The 5th generation and above were all old antique. They were either in deep slumber or remained within the encampment, bearing the important responsibility of protecting their clansmen. They wouldn't easily appear. Not everyone he met was like Luaccio, so strong that he couldn't fight back. In the blink of an eye, Haidasir had already swung the crimson whip in his hand when he arrived in front of Tushini. However, Haidasir was stunned in the next instant. Tushini had attacked even faster than him, and it could even be said to be effortless. He easily grabbed Haidasir's wrist, preventing his blood whip from unleashing its full power. After Tushini grabbed Haidasir's wrist, he directly pulled him up, swung him around, and then fiercely threw him to the ground. Haidasir's entire back hit the floor, smashing out a large number of fragments. He stared blankly at the ceiling, looking like he was thinking about life. At the same time, several short swords made of bloody light suddenly shot down from the air, nailing Hydasir's hands and feet, fixing him completely. Ah! Hydasir let out a blood-curdling scream. Of course, this kind of injury wouldn't take his life as a vampire. But the pain wouldn't disappear. Tushni calmly walked around Hydasir and said indifferently, "Hydasir, have you been a dark merchant for too long that you've forgotten how to fight?" Tushni. Hydasir appeared flustered and exasperated. He bared his sharp fangs and clenched his fists, trying to struggle free from the blood swords. A large part of a vampire's power comes from anger. You actually know how to get angry now. Tushni shook his head. It's a pity that you've been pampered for too long. Your body must have rusted. A violent bloody aura emerged from Hydasir's body at this moment. The steam-like airflow began to scatter, and a gust of wind blew in front of the laboratory. Tushni just shook his head. With a wave of his hand, another huge blood sword appeared out of thin air. This time, it went straight for Hydasir's heart. For vampires, their weakness was the source of power, the heart. The moment this blood sword pierced the skin on Hydasir's chest, Hydasir's expression changed dramatically. The power that erupted out of anger instantly dropped, accompanied by deep fear. Perhaps Tushni was right. Hydasir hadn't fought for a long time. The moment he faced the threat of death, he didn't think of how to resist, but escape out of fear. He also thought of the rose pattern imprinted on the blood sword. You really did. Eat Karen, this is her. The blood sword pierced the skin on Hydasir's chest and easily penetrated his chest. The blade was almost buried in his chest. After Hydasir finished his last sentence, he closed his eyes and his body became completely still. Tushni bent down, gripped the hilt of the blood-colored sword, and slowly pulled it out. But he suddenly stopped. Before the blade was completely pulled out, Hydasir's body melted in an instant, like water hitting a castle made of sand. Hydasir's body melted little by little and finally turned into a black mud-like substance. Tushni finally pulled the blood sword out of the ground and shook his head. You don't have much fighting ability left, but your ability to escape has improved. As Tushni said, he looked around. After making sure that Hydasir was not hiding elsewhere, he slowly walked away. He whispered, Hydasir, if it's not you, then only Takizawa and Eve are left, in the maze of the cellar of the castle in the vineyard. In a place deeper than the cellar maze, there was a long black coffin. The coffin door suddenly opened. A figure suddenly sat up in the coffin, gasping for breath. There was a look of horror on his face. Hydasir subconsciously grabbed his heart, and his expression turned from fear to ferociousness. He was no longer handsome and seductive. You actually wasted one of my clay figurines. I've been a dark merchant for so many years, and I only got 2 from the Magician Association. Tushni. Hydasir got up from the black coffin and rejoiced in his heart. He did not expect that he would be killed in an instant by Tushni. Moreover, he did not even have to use his full strength. He coldly snorted and suddenly said, What's wrong with being a merchant? Merchants are full of treasures. If I didn't become a merchant, I might have died this time. Hydasir suddenly looked up, as if he wanted to see through the layers of soil and see everything in the cellar maze above. His eyes turned cold. Tushni, it seems you don't have the sincerity to take out the true blood, then don't blame me. After saying that, Hydasir suddenly stretched out his arm and flipped up his sleeve. At the same time, he used his fingernail to cut his wrist. A stream of blood flowed out from his wrist and fell to the ground. However, it was instantly absorbed by the black soil on the ground. Hydasir could be heard chanting something in a low voice. Sleeping ancestor, the ancestor of the great Fernandez blood, please wake up from death. The blood seeped into the soil and continued to sink deeper. In the end, the blood seemed to have stopped on something. It was a completely withered corpse. The instant the blood seeped into the corpse's chest, the location of the dried corpse's heart suddenly throbbed, a pair of bloody eyes suddenly opened. While moving forward, Luaccio suddenly stopped. This caused Zhong Luoyue, who was tailing him, to suddenly become nervous. In this extremely terrifying environment, it was easy for the taut nerves to be disturbed by something small. What happened? Luoqiu suddenly looked at the ground. Zhong Luoyue also looked down. However, there was nothing on the ground. She did not know what Luoqiu was looking at. Nothing. I just suddenly remembered something. Luoqiu shook his head. Zhong Luoyue seemed to have gotten used to this young guy. She just nodded. She looked at the butterfly flying in front of them and asked puzzledly, "Why are you following it? Do you have any special intention? And you are not an ordinary person, right?" The last question was the one that Zhong Luoyue decided to ask after thinking for a while. Luoqiu looked at Zhong Luoyue and then continued to follow the radiant goddess Flash Butterfly. Zhong Luoyue had to catch up with him. "Sorry, everyone has their own secrets. If you don't want to tell me, I am being impulsive." Luoqiu suddenly said, "Actually, in my opinion, you are not an ordinary person." "Me?" Zhong Luoyue was surprised. She then smiled bitterly and said, "Facing those terrifying zombie army and blood-sucking monsters, I can only be slaughtered." "What is the definition of an ordinary person?" Luoqiu asked again. "A mediocre person." Zhong Luoyue frowned and then carefully gave an answer. She suddenly had a very strange feeling, as if she was humbly asking for advice, as if she was facing a teacher. But this person was still very young. They don't have a prominent family background, they don't have a rich life, but their minds are sound. They can be disappointed, but they can be happy, Luoqiu said slowly. They don't have any special talent. Maybe they have one or two things that they are good at. They struggle in society, thinking about tomorrow every day. They don't have a long-term vision, but they look at the present, full of hope and resentment. There are many things that they can't do, but there are also many things that they can do. They are the largest group of people in the world. Zhong Luoyue asked tentatively, "Ordinary people? Apart from that, is there anything else?" Luoqiu asked back. Zhong Luoyue shook her head and disagreed. "I mean, you are not ordinary in another sense. Maybe you have some special ability, divine power." Luoqiu said, "Miss Zhong, in the eyes of ordinary people, do you think that your wealth, connections and the things that your family can do are also a special ability, divine power?" This. Zhong Luoyue was speechless. It is said that money is omnipotent, it can do almost anything. Wealth seems to be a powerful ability. Luoqiu smiled and said, "Recently, I watched a movie about two superheroes. The first asked the second superhero what kind of superpower he has. The second superhero replied that he has unparalleled speed, even faster than lightning. Then, the second superhero also asked the first superhero what kind of superpower he has. The first superhero replied that he is very rich." Zhong Luoyue opened her mouth. Luoqiu said, "Those with superpowers can do a lot of things. Those with money can wear a lot of high-tech equipment and can also do a lot of impossible things. And they." Luoqiu looked at Zhong Luoyue and said, "In the eyes of the world, they are all superheroes. Miss Zhong, what do you think?" Zhong Luoyue shook her head and smiled wryly. "My question is different, but I have nothing to say now. You are sophistry. However, I will not ask again." "Maybe you will like your previous state more in the future," Luoqiu said softly, "but that is not necessarily the case." "All right." Zhong Luoyue smiled wryly again. "Thank you for the philosophy lesson, however, I just want to leave this place. Maybe you can help me? Let's get straight to the point. Take me out of here and I will not owe you anything." "Don't worry, you will be safe by my side," Luoqiu said casually. "I will not leave this place for the time being." Zhong Luoyue was helpless. She really could not do anything to this fellow. But superheroes with superpowers and rich superheroes made Zhong Luoyue understand something. Unfortunately, the current situation did not allow her to calm down and carefully understand the meaning of this. The butterfly was still flying in front, and the two seemed to be going deeper underground. However, the strange butterfly quickly stopped in front of a stone door. This was also the end of the passage that the two of them were walking through. The butterfly stopped on a protruding decoration next to the stone door. Luocio approached and fiddled with it. Then he seemed to have triggered some kind of mechanism. The stone door made a rumbling sound and slowly moved. The flashlight of the mobile phone instantly shone into the room behind the stone door. It was completely empty. There was nothing inside. It was just a stone room. Zhong Luoyue used the mobile phone to shine around and found that the stone room was not big, about 30 square meters. However, there were dense cracks on the walls of the stone room, as if they were scratched by the claws of wild beasts. The cracks on these walls were crisscrossed and densely packed, almost covering the four walls. At the same time, the flashlight moved to the front and found that there was a tool used to trap people. There were chains and shackles hanging on the wall. This seems to be a place used to imprison people. Zhong Luoyue frowned, looking at the castle's history. This cellar is built like a maze. Maybe the former owner of this castle was a lord or a military expert. This underground maze may be a defensive measure. What's the basis? Luocio asked curiously. Zhong Luoyue said, I saw some zombies appear. The leather armor they were wearing is very similar to that of hundreds of years ago. I am afraid that there are more secrets in this place than imagined. Good inference. Luocio nodded and did not praise more. This place is not useful. Zhong Luoyue shook her head. It's just a prison cell, there is nothing to see. What are you doing? Luocio walked to one of the walls and reached out to touch the claw marks on the wall. His fingers moved slowly along the lines of the claw marks, over and over again, very slowly. Suddenly, Zhong Luoyue heard a sound, which made her come close to Luocio and shine the flashlight on the place where the sound came from. It was a corner of the stone room. A small figure was curled up in the corner, shivering. It was a woman in a black dress, and her hair was white. Next to the white-haired woman, there was a hole, a broken hole. She came into this room from this broken hole? Zhong Luoyue thought subconsciously, but Luocio walked to the curled and shivering woman at this time. You be careful. She couldn't help but remind him. Luocio waved his hand, indicating that he was fine. Finally, he came to the curled woman, squatted down, and whispered, Elizabeth. The woman slowly raised her head, the eyes under the white eyebrows were red, and tears were falling. Her face was pale, but there was a touch of red on her lips, and two blood-sucking fangs were exposed. Yen PS1. 7/7 PS2. I originally thought that I had cleared my debt, but why did it turn out like this? I clearly have a new creator, and I clearly have a new motivation to write. These are all sources of joy, and when these two types of joy are stacked together, I should have been happy. But why is it like this? Chapter 888. Zhong Luoyue had been carefully hiding behind Luocio, intently observing the girl who appeared in the secret room. When she saw the other party raise her head and reveal the vampire fangs that left a deep impression on Zhong Luoyue, she suddenly grasped the lipstick ceramic pistol. Perhaps it was useless because she had already tested it on Lady Eve. This was just a conditioned reflex. However, this obviously hostile action instantly stimulated Elizabeth. She, who was hugging her knees, suddenly let go of her hands, leaned forward, opened her mouth, and made a roaring sound. Seeing this, Luocio said, Do you want to suck blood? Zhong Luoyue heard this question. Is this guy a little confused about the situation? This girl was in a very unstable state at first glance. She probably couldn't listen to any words. At this time, any stimulation could make her go crazy. As for Zhong Luoyue himself, he was already regretting his hostile actions, but it was too late for him to back down now. Elizabeth seemed to have heard this sentence. The fierce gaze under the white eyebrows instantly shifted from Zhong Luoyue to Luocio. She suddenly jumped up and pushed Luocio directly to the ground. Elizabeth rode on Luocio's stomach, sitting on his body. Her black skirt covered below, like a blooming black lotus. At the same time, her hands also grabbed Luocio's neck. She opened her mouth with fangs again and again. In an instant, Zhong Luoyue was going to shoot. This was also an instinctive reaction. However, her palm seemed to be slapped by something at this time. The force was not strong, but the lipstick ceramic pistol was slapped away. Zhong Luoyue was shocked, but she saw Luocio, who was lying on the ground, slightly raised his palm, as if to signal her not to move. Luocio was still looking at Elizabeth. There was no panic on his face, no struggle, still so calm. Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt that his cultivation of the mind was too immature compared to his opponent's. Luocio slowly said to Elizabeth, who was about to do something to him at this time, "Since you want to suck blood, why hesitate?" "I didn't resist at all." Elizabeth's body lowered a little. Her long white hair like a waterfall fell in front of Luocio's face. Her lips were trembling, between a state of closing and opening, which couldn't be freely controlled. Her eyelashes also trembled violently, her pupils covered with blood, sometimes clear, sometimes turbid. "What are you thinking?" Luocio still looked at her eyes. Elizabeth suddenly made a meaningless moan. "Even if you pinched my neck, you didn't use it. Why?" "I can't." At this moment, her eyes were clear, but she couldn't control her body. Her fangs were almost touching the skin on Luocio's neck. I can't." "Why not?" Luocio didn't move. "Grandpa will be disappointed. Mother will also. Ye will be disappointed." "I can't let them be disappointed, their hope." But her fangs were already on Luocio's skin, pressing down slightly. She seemed to be making a final struggle. Luocio said softly at this time, "So, you're just responding to Amon's expectations? Or is there something else?" Her eyes became clearer at this moment. "I don't know. I really don't know. I just want to, really want to, really want to, really want to. I'm sorry, I really want to taste blood." She finally bit Luocio's neck. Like a child who tasted the forbidden fruit for the first time, Elizabeth's snow-white body was almost flushed because of excitement. Her breathing became rapid, and her whole body became sensitive. She began to exert strength in her legs. Her legs that were sitting on Luocio's waist were clamped tightly. In an instant, she had an unprecedented feeling of satisfaction. "Don't suck too much, or your body won't be able to stand it." Luocio's voice was still so calm, as if the one who was being sucked was not him. Elizabeth suddenly opened her eyes at this time. Her fangs were pulled out from Luocio's neck. At the moment when she tasted the blood of a real living person, the restless vampire blood in her body magically calmed down. She even had the misconception that she could freely restrain the power of the vampire in her body. Not to say that it was a misconception, but she could really control this madness very well. Elizabeth sat up, lowered her eyes, looked at the person who really let her suck blood for the first time, and subconsciously reached out to touch her lips and fangs. "This is the taste of blood," Elizabeth muttered to herself. This was the blood of a real living person, not the pure blood provided by the 13 clans. The pure blood was collected from the captive people. The pure blood was cold. It did not feel like the blood of a living person. When the warm blood invaded the lips, it was like a kiss. It was unforgettable for a vampire. At this time, her thoughts were very clear, as if a cage was broken, and her thoughts were free. She felt better than ever, as if she was really alive at this moment. Or it could be said that she was loyal to herself. "Why do you want to?" Elizabeth looked at the person who sucked blood for the first time. She didn't even know his name. "It seems that you are in a good condition now." Luocio smiled at this time. "But before that, can you get up from my body?" Casually sitting on a man's body, it doesn't look like the behavior of a virtuous woman. Elizabeth was startled. It was fine if he didn't say it, but once he said it, she felt that her sensitive sense of touch was infinitely magnifying the abnormal feeling of contact with the other party. Even if it was air, she could clearly feel it on her skin, and soon this kind of close contact with no distance. She suddenly stood up in a panic, and at the same time, she hurriedly tidied up her skirt. Elizabeth also looked at Lucio nervously at the same time, hesitated and said, Are you okay? Lucio stood up, first patted the dust on his body, and then said indifferently, Adults donating blood, a few 100 milliliters at a time is not necessarily a big deal. Your mouthful, actually, is not much. As for the injury, isn't it already healed? Elizabeth glanced at Luocio's neck. The wound caused by her fangs had already disappeared. Although it was her first time sucking blood, it did not prevent her from learning all kinds of knowledge about vampires. But Elizabeth still wanted to say something, but suddenly realized a problem. That was, the other party did not seem to be afraid. And this was the first time someone was so concerned about whether she was willing to suck blood. His real thoughts, Your grandfather, Amand, is already dead. Lucio suddenly said at this time. Elizabeth's face suddenly turned pale. She had already calmed down, and even the memory of when she was in a daze gradually became clear. Elizabeth subconsciously grabbed Luocio's wrist. My grandfather, Lucio shook his head. I killed him. Hearing this, Elizabeth's eyes instantly turned red, and she opened her sharp fangs at Lucio. Anger caused her whole body to emit a blood-red mist like steam. If you want to take revenge on me, that's fine too. Lucio said indifferently at this time, but you're too weak, you're still far from being able to kill me. I advise you to hide first, and come find me when you're stronger. Elizabeth suddenly reached out to grab Luocio's chest, directly grabbing his clothes. She was as angry as an angry lion. Jean Louis became nervous again. But to her surprise, Elizabeth did not launch any attack as she imagined. Her angry expression disappeared in an instant. Instead, she bit her lips lightly, trying her best not to cry. Jean Louis suddenly felt a pang in his heart. Her appearance was too sorrowful, enough to move anyone. Her delicate body, the features of an albino, and the face of a young girl. She was so fragile that it was as if she was made of snow. Thank you, she just grabbed Luocio's collar, buried her face and softly sobbed, Thank you. Thank you. Let my grandfather. Let him die as a human and not a zombie. Thank you. Lucio was stunned. In fact, Lucio was more than willing to let Elizabeth die. If he could give Elizabeth a reason to live, at least she could quickly get out of her grief. He did not mind letting Elizabeth use him as a target for revenge. Although this method was a bit old-fashioned, it was obviously the fastest way. He did not intend to let Elizabeth feel grateful or anything like that. Anyway, Luocio's idea was, after today, they probably would not have any interaction in the future. Whether others liked him or hated him, it did not matter. But this child seemed to be very smart, right? Lucio subconsciously looked at Jean Louis, only to see Miss Jean shrugging and saying, If you want to be the bad guy, please make your expression more colorful next time. At least sneer a few times. Or do you think that women nowadays are like the female protagonists in romance novels, where a few words will cause a misunderstanding and I won't listen? Lucio blinked and could only nod. Be more careful next time. He always felt that if this matter was changed to Yu, she would be able to handle it well. Lucio was used to reflecting on himself, and never thought that with his experience, he could do better than Yu. Sure enough, it felt like he was being raised to be a useless person. He reached out and gently patted Elizabeth's shoulder, but she still held on to his collar and did not want to let go. Lucio could only say, Your grandfather said in the end, he hoped that you can live as long as you can live. Elizabeth slowly raised her head, slightly opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something. But at this moment the ground suddenly shook. The whole secret room at this time appeared to shake, and the debris on top of the head quickly fell down. Elizabeth's face became serious, turning her head to look behind, and said in surprise, There is a very evil force coming from the ground. It's the vampire of the upper generation. A few minutes ago, Somewhere in the cellar maze. A group of guests who had been lost because of the complexity of the cellar maze were now curled up in the corner. In front of them, there were two men who were fighting with zombies, Song Air and Song San. Facing the endless zombie army, Song Air and Song San, who didn't have as much internal energy as Song Da, were almost exhausted. It wasn't that they didn't want to leave and ignore these irrelevant people, but that the zombies had almost blocked all the exits. Song Da is not dead, is he? We only came here because of the mark he left behind. Song Air panted heavily. What are you talking about? Have you seen Song Da's body on the way? Song San quickly said. Maybe Song Da has become a zombie? Song Air was afraid that he was a pessimist. If that's the case, then we can only eliminate him, Song San said with a serious face, without the slightest hesitation. But in fact, both of them knew that it was doubtful to be able to survive the endless attacks of zombies. At this time, in the zombie crowd, something was suddenly shot. Song Air was careless, and this thing was shot in front of him. He subconsciously reached out to block it, but he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm. It was a fleshy whip that looked like a tentacle and a tongue. There was a sharp, biting organ on it, which split apart to hold a leech-like monster. Did that monster catch up? In just a moment, Song Air did something very cruel to himself. He quickly pulled out a small knife from his belt, and without saying anything, cut the flesh on his arm that was bitten. When he cut the flesh on his arm, the tongue that was biting him bounced away proudly. Song Air clenched his teeth, and his head was covered in cold sweat. Seeing this, Song San took out a small bottle from his pocket without saying anything, and sprinkled the contents on Song Air's arm. Suddenly, there was a sizzling sound, and the large wound on Song Air's arm began to corrode. The two of them were back to back, and saw that in the zombie crowd, a bunch of zombies were suddenly pushed out by something, and finally landed on the ground. The two of them saw the two leech-like monsters. At this time, they each had 8 tentacles on their bodies, like whips, sweeping away the zombies around them. We meet again, my food. The two leech-like monsters said the same voice, but there was nothing wrong with it. An army of zombies, blood-sucking leech-like monsters. Song Air and Song San looked at each other, and thought that this time they might really die here. If I knew this, I wouldn't have followed you down the mountain. Wouldn't it have been better to be a monk on the mountain? Song Air suddenly lamented. Why didn't you say you were a vegetarian when you played with female celebrities? Song San couldn't help but curse. Yen 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 PS1. I have something to do tomorrow, I'll catch up tomorrow, that's it for today. Chapter 889. Of course, Song Air and Song San wouldn't quarrel with each other because of a female star. Otherwise, wouldn't their decades of brotherhood be wasted? But now, they were facing each other and cursing with red faces. Takizawa was different from Eve. He could understand Chinese, because his family lived next to a big country in the east, so he had inherited a lot of the language of the big country in the east. Because he could understand, Takizawa felt it was inconceivable that these two guys would quarrel over such a small thing. Takizawa's body was split into two. At this moment, the two bodies moved almost simultaneously, looking back and forth between Song Air and Song San, listening to each other's curses. But at this moment, Song San suddenly waved his arm, and 3 beams of cold light shot out. They were aimed at the eyes of one of the dragon swamps. However, the 3 cold lights didn't work. Instead, they were easily slapped to the ground by Takizawa's tentacles. Takizawa sneered. Idiot, do you think I'll be fooled again? Song San's face darkened, and he suddenly shouted, Take this! He jumped up and waved his hand, and suddenly a white mist spread out from Song San's palm. Takizawa thought it was a special attack, so he quickly slapped with his tentacles, but the white mist was slapped away. The white mist scattered like dust, and the two Takizawa couldn't dodge in time, so the white powder scattered on their bodies, especially the exposed eyes of the two Takizawa. Ah! The two Takizawa suddenly screamed in pain, and their bodies shook crazily. waving their tentacles, sweeping away the surrounding zombies. Ah! My eyes! My eyes! What did you do to me? Are you an idiot? Haven't you seen people scatter lime in a fight? Lime! I can't believe that you would use such a despicable method. The two Takizawa were angry. Song-san was at the peak of an ordinary person, and his strength was enough to be a master. But they didn't expect him to be a dirty guy who could scatter lime. So angry. Haha, it's perfect to deal with a monster like you. Song-san laughed, and Song-air jumped out from Song-san's body. Without saying anything, he kicked one of the Takizawa's body. This series of kicks lasted at least a dozen times, and the last kick sent Takizawa flying out of the zombie crowd. However, the two of them did not succeed because there was another Takizawa here. Song-air leaned on Song-san's side and whispered, "That move just now, I used up almost all of my power to kick that guy until he spat out blood. I'm afraid that even the blind man in the village wouldn't be able to deal with this monster. Ah! I'm going to suck all of your blood dry." The remaining one Takizawa suddenly became furious. Its body swelled up in an instant and turned into a huge leech. Each of the 10-meter-long blood-sucking leech's tentacles were like steel bars. As it flapped around, it instantly destroyed the entire place, making it look like it was about to collapse. Song-air and Song-san didn't expect this monster to have a trick up its sleeve. It seemed to have been completely enraged, and they couldn't help but complain. However, just as the two of them had the thought of "I'm going to die," the floor suddenly shook, and in the next second, the huge blood-sucking leech's body fell to the ground, motionless. Song-air and Song-san could only bide their time, but they vaguely felt that this was a little strange. However, before they could think for too long, the huge leech in front of them suddenly exploded. A large amount of blood spurted out as if it was raining blood. In the pile of flesh of the huge leech, a tall figure could be faintly seen. It was slightly taller than Songda, about 2 meters tall. Taking a closer look, it was actually a shriveled corpse, a mummy. At this moment, the mummy suddenly opened its hands, and its palms turned into claws, grabbing at the air. Song-air and Song-san felt a huge force pulling their bodies, and they had no choice but to tighten their horse stance and resist bitterly. They barely resisted, but the ordinary guests didn't have such good skills. The guests' bodies were grabbed one by one and flew towards the mummy. The mummy casually grabbed the body of the first guest that flew in front of it, and the guest screamed in horror. It suddenly opened its mouth with huge fangs, and directly bit the guest's neck. In the blink of an eye, the blood in this person's body seemed to have been sucked dry. In just a few seconds, he was ruthlessly thrown to the ground, his eyes rolled up, and there was no more life in him. The mummy didn't seem to care about Song-air and Song-san's resistance at this moment. It just reached out and grabbed a female guest that flew in front of it, and without saying a word, bit down and sucked dry. At this moment, the mummy's body gradually became plump, and the muscles and blood vessels were actually growing in the bones at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, when the sixth guest's blood was sucked dry, the mummy had already grown very strong, like a guy that had been skinned, leaving only the muscles and tissues. At the same time, after the mummy appeared, the surrounding zombies seemed to have fallen into a state of panic. They didn't continue to move, but just stayed in the same place, motionless. Song-air and Song-san saw that the situation was very bad, and at this moment, how could they still care about the screaming guests? The two of them directly ran away. The mummy just looked at the backs of Song-air and Song-san who were running for their lives, and didn't pay attention to them, but grabbed a guest and began to suck the blood. When the last guest's blood was sucked dry, the mummy threw the last guest on the ground, and behind the mummy, a slightly respectful voice sounded. "Great ancestor, could it be that with so many sacrifices, it still isn't enough to wake you up?" It was Citisil, and the dried corpse in front of him was obviously the Viscount Fernandez, the bloodline ancestor of the Fernandez family, the most powerful vampire in the Fernandez family, and the first vampire in the Fernandez family. Still not enough, I need more. Like the sound of grinding gears, a very heavy voice. At this moment, Viscount Fernandez cracked open his lips and looked at Citisil. More. Hydasir smiled and said, Lord Viscount of the Fernandez family, there are countless foods in the outside world. You will definitely be satisfied. Unexpectedly, Viscount Fernandez suddenly flashed and appeared in front of Hydasir in an instant, before grabbing Hydasir's neck. He wanted to struggle, but when he met Viscount Fernandez's gaze, it seemed like his soul was trembling. This was the source of Citisil's vampire blood. I feel a similar aura from this monster, Viscount Fernandez said angrily. Viscount Fernandez said angrily, but it's so ugly. As my descendant, you actually got involved with such a monster. The glory of the Fernandez family will be tarnished by you. Citisil was startled and felt that this script was wrong. It shouldn't be like this. The ancestor actually took out his anger on me? It wasn't the first time Citisil took the wrong script today. Mr. Luaccio, then the unbelievably powerful Tuscany, and then his ancestor, sure enough, he took the wrong script, right? Great ancestor, please listen to me. The one you killed is called Takizawa. It's a vampire of the Takizawa family. Hydasir hurriedly said, the Takizawa clan is a secret art created by that terrifying mixed blood, transforming them into monsters of ridicule. The 13 clans still haven't admitted that they can be a member of us vampires. The relationship between me and Takizawa is just a relationship of exploitation. What we want to do is to research the true blood, to fight against the 13 clans. He almost finished speaking in one breath. Only now did he feel the force on his neck fade away. Viscount Fernandez had already slowly loosened his hand, allowing Citisil to breathe. That mixed blood. Viscount Fernandez frowned. No wonder. How long has it been since this Takizawa was born? Why don't I have any impression of it? Citisil said, Great ancestor, you have been sleeping for nearly 350 years, and the Takizawa family was only born 200 years ago. It's normal that you don't know. Humph. Viscount Fernandez coldly snorted. This kind of created monster dares to call itself a family. The 13 clans should clean up these guys who destroyed the purity of the vampire bloodline. The longer you live, the more backward you become. The furious Viscount Fernandez waved his hand, and a violent airflow spread out, blowing away a large number of zombies. Citisil didn't speak. He knew that his ancestor was clearly a fanatical supporter of the bloodline theory. However, Viscount Fernandez suddenly turned around and looked behind him. Citisil, who noticed the ancestor's action, slightly shivered. Because at this moment, he saw a person that he really wanted to see when he returned, Tuscany. Yes, Tuscany was here. He hid in the midst of the numerous zombies, and only when Viscount Fernandez swept the zombies away and fell to the ground, did Tuscany still stand there conspicuously. He was still standing with his hands clasped behind his back, looking so unruly. Tuscany slowly walked up and said indifferently, Citisil, is this what you're relying on? The originator of the Fernandez family bloodline. Tuscany, you didn't expect this, did you? Citisil smiled cheerfully. The manor you have lived in for so long, in the deepest part of its underground, there is the invincible power of my Fernandez family. Tuscany shook his head and started sizing up this Viscount Fernandez. He suddenly said, Hydasir, don't tell me you still can't tell? Citisil was startled and subconsciously asked, See what? Tuscany sighed, Citisil, if it was just to deal with you guys, why would I release these things and some guys that were created over the years? Citisil's expression changed slightly. Could it be that you are dealing with? No, how could you know? He subconsciously looked at his ancestor, Viscount Fernandez, and then quickly denied this idea. It shouldn't be. Tuscany shouldn't know that the originator of the Fernandez family hasn't died yet. Even the 13 clans don't know. But Tuscany didn't seem to want to pay attention to Citisil at all. He looked straight at Viscount Fernandez and muttered, You are very powerful. I can feel the evil power emitting from your body. Perhaps after you come back this time, you will soon surpass your former self and become the fourth generation. In other words, the reason why you've been in hibernation for over 300 years is actually for this transformation. Viscount Fernandez said with a smile. You are the person in charge of the True Blood project that Citadel mentioned? Obediently hand over the True Blood, and I can grant you the surname Fernandez and let you become one of my clansmen. Unfortunately, I never had any true blood here. Tushini shook his head. Viscount Fernandez coldly said, No one dares to disobey me. Tushini sneered, No one? How arrogant is this guy? Fernandez? Don't tell me you've forgotten about the 13 clans? You're actually nothing. Ignorant brat, you've successfully angered me. Viscount Fernandez suddenly opened his huge mouth and let out a terrifying roar. Tushini didn't show any fear and coldly snorted, You're still not the fourth generation. You know nothing about power. Viscount Fernandez swung his hand and a berserk airflow suddenly shot out. The scarlet airflow instantly divided into 4 and attacked Tushini from the left, right, up, and down. Facing these scarlet airflow, Tushini didn't seem to have any intention of dodging or resisting. He only watched in silence. Until this moment, a huge black shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. Bang! The 4 scarlet airflows fiercely collided with the shadow in front of Tushini, and the final result was that no one could do anything to the other. Werewolf! At this moment, Viscount Fernandez suddenly let out an even louder roar towards this guy who hindered him. It was a huge lichen standing upright. It was even taller than Viscount Fernandez. It's not a simple lichen, it's a zombified lichen. Hydasir panicked, Ancestor, be careful. This guy has created a lot of fusion monsters over the years. This zombie lichen is probably only one of his creations. Viscount Fernandez frowned. Heterogeneous fusion, fusing 2 incompatible species to create. This is the bloodline of the Isher family? Hydasir said, Tushini is the last descendant of the Isher family, the first embraced descendant of Karen Isher. Furthermore, I suspect that he has already eaten his predecessor. Offending your superior, you deserve death. Viscount Fernandez's eyes emitted a ferocious look. You shameful kinslayer. I said, You're still not the fourth generation. Tushini waved his hand. 2 heavy voices were heard. 2 more zombie lichens with the same physique appeared on the left and right of the first zombie lichen. Chapter 890. Wait, I can't run anymore. Song Air panted like a cow, holding his knees. He had to stop. He had used up almost all of his true power from the series of kicks, and he had been running for his life all this way, which almost squeezed out all of his physical strength. Song Sen couldn't help but roll his eyes. You don't say it's not enough chi when you attack women. Go. Song Air punched Song San with his fist weakly, then said, That mummy won't catch up with us, right? It's hard to say. Song Air said with a serious look. I'm afraid he doesn't think we can escape. He just wants to suck all the people on his side dry and leave us last. Strange, why is this road blocked? Song San looked forward, finding that it was not a complete wall, but a broken rock blocking the road. Ada's mark is in this direction. The mark disappeared here, so Ada might be on the other side. Oh no. Could it be that Ada blocked the way? Isn't he tricking us? Nonsense, Ada isn't that kind of person. Song Air shook his head, then put his ear on the rock and started to knock. He wanted to see if there was a weak point, and when he recovered some strength, he would attack the weak point to break this blocked road. Unexpectedly, just when Song Air put his ear on a complete rock, he suddenly heard a loud sound, and then the rock wall in front of him suddenly exploded. Song Air and Song San were knocked down by the rock at the same time. While the 2 of them were still in shock, they actually saw that there was a hole that was neither big nor small on the rocky wall. At this moment, something was slowly crawling out from the hole. It was Song De. Ada. Song Air and Song San hurriedly pulled Song De out of the carriage. After Song De came out, he was covered in wounds. His chest was full of wounds caused by sharp weapons. If it weren't for the fact that Ada was an expert in thwart kung fu, he would have reported to the King of Hell long ago. Ada, what happened to you? Song Air hurriedly stepped forward and took out a powdery substance. He began to sprinkle it on Song Da's wound to stop the bleeding. Stop talking, look at this. At this moment, Song Da put his hand into the hole, as if he was fishing for something. Not long after, Song Da actually pulled out a head. It was Lady Eve's head. I've trapped this old hag. Fight in a jar. Ada gasped. He felt that if the powder was sprinkled on each of his wounds, the rest of his life would be taken away. The pain was unbearable. If I hadn't been smart enough to block off the front and back paths, preventing this old witch from displaying her speed, the one lying on the ground right now would definitely be me, Song Da said with lingering fear. Song Air and Song San naturally knew how dangerous it was to fight these blood-sucking monsters. However, the fact that Song Da managed to kill one of them was beyond their expectations. The three of them exchanged information, and each of them knew what happened after that. They were genuinely happy that Song Air and Song San were able to escape with their lives time and time again. So, they said excitedly, so there's a super mummy here. If I had known, I would have opened the other side. That's right. That way, we wouldn't have to face that mummy. Song Air and Song San both felt pity for Song Da, but they felt that something was wrong. By the way, Ada, do you still have the strength to open the other side? We can't get out like this. Song Air asked expectantly. I don't even have the strength to move my fingers right now. Song Da shook his head. So? Song San opened his eyes wide. So, you're talking about a super mummy. Song Da gasped. Song Air stood up, grabbed his hair and wailed. 18 years later, I'll be a man again. Ada, San, we'll be brothers again in the next life. Damn, Ada, you idiot. Can't you save some strength? This time, I'm going to die because of you. What should we do? The other two brothers raised their middle fingers at Song Air at the same time. Let's find a place to hide. Song Da helplessly suggested in the end. When we first came here, I saw another passage, but I don't know where it leads. What if we still encounter zombies? How about it, do you want to take a gamble? Let's do it. Take a gamble, a bicycle will become a motorcycle. Song Air clenched his teeth. Even the three zombie werewolves were no match for Viscount Fernandez. Viscount Fernandez had just woken up from a deep sleep, so the human energy he absorbed wasn't enough to awaken all of his dormant strength. Tushini focused his attention on Viscount Fernandez's strength and became nervous inwardly. I didn't expect that this old monster would be so much stronger than an ordinary fifth generation after waking up after 300 years of sleep. As expected of the guy most likely to become the fourth or even third generation of the Fernandez family in the past few hundred years. Thinking of this, Tushini flipped his palm, and a patterned blood-colored longsword slowly spat out from his palm. Taking advantage of the moment when one of the zombie werewolves hugged Viscount Fernandez, he rushed into the battlefield. Originally, Haidasir wanted to block him, but at this moment, those motionless zombies suddenly moved. Their movements couldn't be said to be fast, but they had the advantage in numbers. Advancing dauntlessly, they created a lot of trouble for Haidasir. It wasn't that he couldn't kill them, but that he couldn't kill them all in a short time. In addition, in such a narrow space, using a wide-range attack would only cause harm to oneself. But just as Haidasir swept away a group of zombies with his blood-colored whip, he saw a guy that was like a nightmare to him. Luochio. Behind Luochio was Zhong Luoyue, as well as the sorrowful Elizabeth. Haidasir's body suddenly stiffened, because he couldn't tell whether Luochio came to find him, or if he just happened to come to this place. After all, this underground maze was too unfriendly for outsiders. He recalled Luochio's formidable strength, and the fear he felt when he couldn't fight back. However, he quickly suppressed this fear, because the most powerful vampire of the Fernandez family was right beside him. Hydasir felt that he wasn't afraid at all, and even had some other thoughts. His gaze suddenly became hesitant like a poisonous snake. Liar, liar, still a liar. Zhong Luoyue thought of a lot of curses, but the one that she could think of was the word liar. Of course, she cursed in her heart. Didn't this guy say that following him would be very safe, and that nothing would happen? What was happening in front of them? Several huge werewolves and the god of gamblers Tushini were jointly attacking a monster that seemed to have been skinned and only had muscle tissue left. Moreover, this monster seemed to be easily beating the god of gamblers' side to the point that they could only keep dodging. And there was also the zombie army that was biting everywhere. She shouldn't have followed this guy, even though she didn't have any better choice. Why is this guy looking at you like a priest who wants to molest children? Is he a pervert? Zhong Luoyue couldn't help but frown. Of course, this was just a small counterattack to the current situation. And he is indeed a pervert. Luoqiu nodded directly. Zhong Luoyue rolled her eyes. At this moment, she was only thinking about how to escape, so she didn't have time to chat with Luoqiu. However, the moment Elisabeth met Hydasir's gaze, she subconsciously grasped Luoqiu's sleeve. Why, you seem to be very afraid of him? Luoqiu asked. Elisabeth lowered her head somewhat timidly, stammering. He used to be the one who sold me pureblood, so he has a close relationship with my family. Luoqiu nodded thoughtfully. Elisabeth hurriedly said, But I don't have much interaction with him. It's because the 13 clans have always provided me with little pureblood, it's not enough for me. Without any other choice, Grandpa could only find Hydasir. He is a dark merchant and has the source of pureblood, but we only have ordinary business dealings. Grandpa, he. Elisabeth didn't say anything in the end. Zhong Luoyue pricked up her ears, trying her best to listen to Elisabeth's words. 13 clans, dark merchant, pureblood? At this moment, Hydasir was walking slowly towards them. His movement was very coquettish. While dodging the zombies, he also attacked, easily passing through the zombie crowd. He was only a few meters away from Luoqiu. My dear friend, we meet again. Did you miss me? Hydasir asked with a crooked voice. Luoqiu suddenly stretched out his hand, then retracted it a little. He then looked at his hand and finally shook his head, saying something that no one could understand. Just a little bit more. What did you say? Zhong Luoyue approached and asked in a low voice, You seem to be very familiar with this guy. I think that would be a very bad thing. Luoqiu quickly shook his head. Hydasir's gaze turned, starting from Elisabeth, then Zhong Luoyue, and finally looked at Luoqiu. He chuckled and said, Luoqiu, you didn't come here to help Tushini, did you? I have no reason to help him for the time being. Luoqiu shook his head. I just want to take Elisabeth to the place where Mr. Amunst passed away. She has the right to do so. Amunst, is it? Hydasir nodded thoughtfully. What a pity. When Amunst was young, he was also a handsome man. What an unforgettable taste. Hydasir, please don't say any more. Elisabeth's expression was somewhat agitated, but she still used a polite tone. Sorry, my Elisabeth. Hydasir smiled and said, Luoqiu, if you just want to go over, can you wait for us to deal with the matter here? Whatever. Luoqiu nodded. Hydasir threw a flirtatious look at him, and then rushed into the zombie crowd. Zhong Luoyue finally felt relieved. Because in her opinion, at least Luoqiu and this guy had negotiated something. But this made Zhong Luoyue even more curious about Luoqiu's identity. What kind of identity did he have to make these vampires so polite? Then there was Tushini. Wasn't he the god of gamblers? When did he get involved with zombies and vampires? While thinking about it, Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt a kind of sadness in her heart. She didn't know where this sadness came from, as if she had lost a very important person in an instant. She subconsciously touched her eyes. She didn't know when the tears came out. And at this moment, a zombie werewolf was blown apart by Viscount Fernandez's punch. At this moment, Viscount Fernandez no longer had a muscle-like appearance, but rather a pale skin. His appearance was about 35 years old, with a gloomy feeling, but overall, he was very handsome. He slowly landed on the ground with a black cloak draped over his body, revealing an evil smile. At this time, Viscount Fernandez twisted his neck and said with a bit of excitement, "Fighting is really the fastest way to wake up the body. Toucheny, right? You and your experiment subjects have contributed a lot. You really don't want to consider my proposal? I appreciate your talent. Although you are a kinslayer, as long as you can bear my blood, I can accept you." "You talk too much nonsense," Toucheny coldly snorted, and the patterned blood-colored long sword in his hand turned from 1 to 2. He held the 2 swords in his hand and spread them out. He slightly lowered his head, but his eyes were looking forward. There was a kind of terrifying momentum crazily rising. Viscount Fernandez shook his head and suddenly said, "There is one thing you are wrong about. That is, I am not the last member of the Fernandez family who can become the 4th-generation clansman. I have already become the 4th generation." Behind Fernandez, a bloody aura rushed out. The bloody aura that kept rushing out turned into a pair of blood-colored wings. At this moment, the zombie werewolves around Toucheny instantly pounced from the left and right, while Toucheny only went for the middle, leaving Viscount Fernandez with no way to dodge. "How do you know the power of the 4th generation?" Viscount Fernandez shook his head and quickly waved his hands, slashing towards Toucheny and the 2 zombie werewolves. In just a split second, the zombie werewolves that had yet to land on the ground were cut into several neat pieces, as if they were cut by a high-pressure water gun, and fell to the ground. At this moment, Toucheny used his 2 swords to block in front of his body. However, it was only for an instant before his body was sent flying. On the edge of the patterned blood-colored sword there were several nicks. Viscount Fernandez leaned forward and instantly rushed out, quickly grabbing Toucheny, who had yet to land on the ground. He grabbed Toucheny's head with his hand and lifted him up into the air. As a 4th-generation vampire, Viscount Fernandez's perception was much more outstanding than Citacil's. You and Citacil should be of the same generation, but in my opinion, whether it is battle awareness or bearing, you are much more outstanding than my unworthy descendant. I'll give you one last chance. Accept my blood and become my descendant. But Toucheny suddenly let go of his swords, letting them fall to the ground, as if he didn't intend to resist. At this moment, Viscount Fernandez suddenly snorted coldly. He grabbed Toucheny's head and threw him out, ruthlessly smashing him into the wall. Toucheny fell from the wall and sat on the ground, lowering his head and not lifting it up. Viscount Fernandez coldly snorted, "You actually want to die? You think you can hide from my perception?" Toucheny was still motionless. In the distance, Luacio's eyes gradually lit up. "You're not Toucheny, who are you?" Viscount Fernandez waved his hand and a blood-colored claw instantly flew out. It directly tore apart Toucheny's mask, tearing apart his disguise. A head full of white hair, exquisite facial features, as if sculpted by the heavens, a breathtakingly beautiful face, but eyes without any color, as if dead. "This woman, I've seen," Jean Louis blurted out, in Toucheny's study, "the woman in the painting, what's going on?" Yin 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 yin.